Hello, my name is Jared. I'm 36. I was raised Jehovah's Witness and I am shunned.
All right, Jared. So you said you were raised one of Jehovah's Witnesses. So that's kind of how you came to be one, I guess, in the first place to some degree. But do you know any of the backstory of your family or anything?
My uh, grandmother, so we're from Mexico, so my family's from Mexico. And my mom, I guess, was the first Jehovah's Witness, in the family. And so it was my grandma who would um see the witnesses in like the town where they were at. And so my grandma would like know these people and she thought they were really nice. And so basically she's like, I'm gonna send my kids with them. Like she never like joined, but she would send all my aunts and uncles and my mom to them. And then like half of them joined, and then half of them didn't. So my mom has like 7 or 8 brothers or something like that. And so they yeah, it was like my mom stuck with it, and then one of my uncles or two of my uncles, and then one of my aunts, kind of did it. But eventually, the only one that really stuck with it was my mom. Everybody ended up just leaving, but some of them never took to it in the first place. But they all ended up like either just never got baptized, or if they got baptized, they got disfellowshipped and left. And my mom was the only one that like really, kind of stuck with it for
Gotcha. So
until.
she went all in, so to speak, comparatively, I guess.
Oh yeah. She
Okay.
she she believed it. I mean, she passed away, a couple years ago, but
Hmm.
until the day she died, she was a very, devout Jehovah's Witness. So
Okay.
that was.
And what about your dad? Was he in the picture? Was he a witness as well?
He is now. So they married. He wasn't a witness. So when they got married, in the 80s, and so they had each been married a couple times. So my mom had like several marriages before she met my dad, and so my dad had been married a couple times. And so then they got married, and then over time he ended up just like um studying, or studying. And I think he got baptized when I was in, I would say, my late teens or early 20s. By that point I didn't live at home anymore. But yeah, he got baptized. He's in his 70s now. So he like goes to the meeting. Not really. It's just he's an old person, so it gives him something to do. And he lives by himself. So like all these people that have known us for 30 years or whatever, they kind of like go check up on him, and gives him things to do. Like on a Sunday, he'll like, it gives him a routine. So, but I don't think he's not like, but he'll also be like, oh, I'm gonna go, gamble with your brother, and do like Christmas. So it's like he's not really hardcore, like, so
Okay, okay. I mean, it's a community, it sounds like, for him. And
it,
well, certainty, purpose, and community, those are things that people often get out of groups like this. And sounds like he's getting some of that. So and I'm sure it means something to him too, that I guess your mom passed and was a witness too, and maybe he holds on to something around that.
yeah. I mean, like I said, I don't think, I think it's a frame of reference. It's like a faith. I don't think he's ever like gung ho about it, but like I said, it gives him, if he weren't doing that, he would be completely by himself, alone, right? So the fact that he does that, and we know these are people that we've known for, since we moved to the United States. So they have a good chunk of his life, 30, 40 years that he's known these people. So I think it's beneficial for him in that sense. So
Yeah,
he,
absolutely.
he enjoys it.
So you said that. So I was going to ask you, what is the worldview that growing up that way gave you? I guess for you, your dad didn't become a full-fledged witness until I think you said your early teenage years. Um, so I don't know if he was really involved in it back then. Did you have kind of a cross section of two different styles, or were you all just living that JW life regardless?
We were raised all Jehovah's Witnesses. My dad was very like hands off in that he wasn't really there kind of growing up. So
Ah, okay.
my he was like, oh sure, like whatever my mom would do, like he was like, just listen to your mother. So we would like, go to the meetings and whatever. Like he wasn't a witness, but everyone else like were, he never put up a fight or anything to be like, oh, I want to raise my kids this way. Like, he could care less. So, if my mom took us to the hall, that was like something less that he had to worry about. So, hey, more power to them. So yeah, no, we were raised all Jehovah's. So I'm the youngest of four. So I have an older brother, and he's my half brother from my mom's first marriage. And then I have two older sisters, and they're from my dad's first marriage. And so I'm the only one from like both of my parents. But we were all raised together and just kind of, you know, off to the meetings and to the Kingdom Hall, and that's what we would do.
All right. So how did you feel being raised in it? Did you feel were you scared of the world around you? Did you feel special? Or was it? Did you kind of have a laissez-faire attitude toward it yourself? What kind of worldview was it giving you growing up in it?
It was, I don't know. I think it was. I really didn't pay it too much attention, and the reason being because it's such a tight knit community. At least where we were at that time, we were like the first kind of generation of the first wave of like that area in Texas where like everyone had just come to the U.S. So where I'm from, there the city, it's El Paso, Texas, and so everybody, like, the city's like 85% Hispanic, you
Okay.
know, and a little bit. So everyone I knew was Hispanic, right? I'd go to school. It was really weird. It's everyone I knew was Hispanic. So everyone in our community was like Jehovah's Witness because that's who we would go to the meetings with, and that's who we saw. And I saw some kids at school, so I knew not everyone was a Jehovah's Witness, but there was enough people in my life that it didn't feel like, oh, we're like the 5 people in this one town that are Jehovah's. Like, no, like there was a ton of us, so it didn't really feel weird. I remember one time I was in 4th grade, I think, like 3rd or 4th grade, and we were learning about like the solar system and like stars and the dinosaurs or whatever. And our teacher talked about this the sun being like basically how stars die, right? And so it was like, oh, the sun's gonna like blow up and like engulf all the planets, and then it's gonna burn out, whatever. And I remember I was really sad, and they're like, the teacher's like, that's not gonna happen tomorrow. That's like billions of years from now. And then I was like, well, we're gonna be alive then, and I don't know what's gonna happen. Like we're kind of screwed, like I was like making plans for like when that happened, because like we weren't ever gonna die. So I was like, I don't know, that was one of the first times I remember like a teacher being like, like, you're a little different, like you don't really understand what's going on. So but I mean,
Well, it is weird, isn't it, to think that you're gonna live forever on this planet? It is an odd thing to believe that does kind of fly in the face of basic science as far as stars burning out and such, right? Like, it is weird.
The look, I think, on this lady's face when I told her, I think she probably had to like not laugh, just be like, this weird little kid, like, just relax. But yeah, I remember, and I got home and I remember telling my mom about, what the teacher said. And my mom never like contradicted teachers, which I really appreciate. And my dad, for all of his flaws, he was actually fairly big on education for us. My dad has like a college degree from Mexico, so he knows like the importance of it. So they were never like, don't listen to your teachers, And I think my mom was like, well, like Jehovah will find a way, They just kind of like, little kids, so they just kind of make it up and like, okay, he'll be, you'll be fine, and blah blah. But that was it. But
I mean, as a little kid, they're making it up, but they do as adults too. I mean, that's how an adult would have to rationalize how that could be true. I mean, if Jehovah is magic, basically, then anything can happen. So maybe this sun will just burn forever. It will never ever burn out, or everyone will go to another planet. There's always, that's why they don't want you thinking too far into the future, because it doesn't add up. But everybody is rationalizing it however they can, that somehow Jehovah will just make it work. And I guess the sun won't burn out. So I mean, it applies to kids, but adults have to do the same thing too for themselves, because because it doesn't add up in the end.
Yeah, I don't know. It was just like funny, but that was
Yeah,
the first time that I kind of knew. And then another thing, I was just kind of thinking about that when,
yeah,
like when I saw the thing. We because we were from Mexico, right? Or we had moved to the U.S. So I moved to the U.S. when I was like 4 or 5. I was very little, um, but we would still go. So like we had a house in Mexico, so we would go like every week, and I mean it's a 20-minute drive from where we lived in the U.S. to the house in Mexico. It's you just go through the border. Back in the day, you just crossed the border, and they didn't have all these like checks and TSA and whatever. So we would go, but I remember I would learn stuff at school. Like um, I must have been like in kindergarten or kindergarten or first grade, and I got home. It was December. It was right before we went on break, right? And we had like a party with like like toys. It was a Christmas party, and I was like, oh, and like I got home and I showed my mom, like, oh my god, they gave us these toys, whatever. And she like sat me down and she's like, we don't do that. Like that's Christmas and whatever. And I was like, because in Mexico, Christmas is different. It's very like about Jesus and like the nativity scene and whatever. And I was like, there was no Jesus in this. Like, how? Like, we don't do this. Like, like this is just like a guy that gives out toys. And then she like explained that it was. And then that was like the first time I learned, like, okay, we don't do Christmas. And then later on, they like the next couple years, like they wanted us to go dressed up as our favorite book character one day to school. And I was like, oh, like I was so excited. I was, I think it was like Dr. Seuss or something I wanted to do. And my mom kept me from school that day. That was Halloween. And so then she had to tell me, like, we don't do Halloween because in Mexico you do Day of the Dead. So you
right.
don't really have Halloween. And so I did, I would find out afterwards that like these were like really fun holidays, but it was like because like I did it and they're like, oh, you don't do this. And then there was a Halloween one. And then I think when I was like in third grade or something, we had a girl. So where I went to was a lot of kids from a military base. So we had Fort Bliss, which is the big military base in El Paso. And so then the kids that or if they don't have enough housing or something on there, they would rent houses by where we are. And so a lot of the kids, like the overflow, would go to my school. And so we had kids from like all over and stuff like that. And I remember this girl, her dad was black and her mom was Korean. So she was like mixed. So she was like really, I remember she was really pretty and she was mixed. And so one day, like her mom came in and like brought us food and like made us like little noodles and, gave us little bags and whatever. It was a birthday party. Like I had no idea. It was just like little, things. And I got home and I remember arguing with my mom about that because she was like, that was a birthday party. And I was like, there was no cake. Like birthday parties have to have cake. Like no cake, no foul. Like, I was like arguing that there was no cake. So I was in the clear.
But what you're really seeing in that is, it's kind of just no fun, right? It's just, oh, you all were enjoying a thing. It must be surrounding something that we can't participate in. Which is, did that bother you a lot, or did you, accept it pretty readily?
I mean, it sucks. Like when you're a little kid, right? Either after you get to a certain age, like I remember after Christmas, right? Because Christmas was like the first one and it's always like the major one. Like, they're like, oh, we're having a Christmas party and like Jared gets to go do math in the library. And I was like, yay, like that's amazing. Like I don't know, I guess made me better at school, I guess. But it was that or like, like you're drawing like I remember it was like you had to make like pumpkins for Halloween and everyone would get to like decorate theirs. And I'm like, mine's a pumpkin. Like all I can make is like this pumpkin and just like adding leaves to it. It's like whatever. It sucks.
Yeah, it is weird though, you not being able to participate and having to, like you said, Jared gets to go do math problems while everybody else has, cake and toys or whatever. It is hard, as a witness kid, because you have to always stand apart from the fun that everybody else is having. You don't get to connect, to attach, to participate in those ways. Um, did you have a lot of friends at school, or did you have a lot of, like, you said you went with a lot of witnesses, so I'm assuming maybe you had some JW friends, but did you make friends with the worldly kids?
It was a mix. I remember having certain witnesses, like there was a couple like witnesses from my hall that we were like the same age. So in elementary school, we like grew up, we were in the same grades. And then as far as like the non-witness kids, we were friendly, and I think my mom allowed us a lot more leeway than other like Jehovah's Witness parents. Like we could never, I think like I had one friend that I could go sleep over at his house, but like my mom knew his family really well and stuff like that. But other kids, like they would come over to our house. Like I wasn't like super secluded, but I also couldn't like become like really, really good friends with them. But yeah, I think there was a good mix. And then early on I learned that like I wanted to be friends with like the non-witness kids. Like they were just like nicer most of the time and just like not as like shitty human beings. So I'm like, I want to hang out with these people better.
So what was it that you saw as a kid that made you, I guess, think that the witness kids were shittier human beings? What was it that you liked about, or what was the contrast you were seeing?
I think like looking back now, that like I'm older and and I know what I know about like human life. I think the witness kids kind of they learn how to be two different people, which for me was really really hard because it would be one way at school and then they'd be another way. And me, like I was always just like it was too. I'm lazy. Like I was too tired to like be like one way around here, and I just wanted to be the same person the whole time. So I noticed that like the non-witness kids, like they would be like if they were a good kid, they were going to be a good kid all the time versus like the witness kids, like it depends like who was around. And I would maybe get in trouble or something, especially if like they came over to my house. Like um yeah, usually the witness kids would like misbehave a lot more than like the non-witness kids. And my mother was no like she was not shy about like spanking other people's kids. Like she's like, you're in my house, like, you know. So that was also a deterrent for like a lot of not good kids to come over to our house. So yeah, so they were they were nicer, I guess.
No, I get that. I think that's really an interesting point. The witness kids have to live in two different worlds, and they're kind of splitting who they are depending on who's around. I like your description of yourself as just being lazy. I think you were just authentic. I think you were just being you, which is a pretty cool thing to be able to do at a young age when everybody around you is not being allowed to be themselves at all. Sounds like you were at least trying to just be yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I liked it. And it was I don't know. We had a very hard life growing up. Like there's other parts of my life, like my family and stuff like that. Other things that were going on that weren't particularly easy. So like I knew what actual stress was, which you probably shouldn't know as a kid, but I knew what like really kind of stressful things were. So I just made my life easier to just like if I don't want to get in trouble or whatever, just hang out with these have these people as my friends, versus like having to like hide what I'm doing or whatever. And then one thing about like at least the witness kids that we grew up with was like we're all adults now and it's fine, but like back in the day, your like worldly friends would like even if you did something wrong, you guys kind of like stuck together. And like I remember like the witness kids, they would throw you under the bus like in a heart. Like if it meant they didn't get in trouble and you got in trouble, like they would do that. And I was like, like that's I don't do that. So
Now, there's a huge snitch culture, right, inside the organization. That's how they keep control on things. And of course, the witness kids are guilted into thinking that they have to tell, or they're a sharer in your sins, and just all this stuff. So it's a tough situation for all the kids involved, really. Again, that split. I want to be your friend, but also if I don't tell on you, then there's going to be hell to pay in some way. it's that's a lot again for a kid to handle and to have to carry it through life. Uh, you said that kind of knew, I guess you knew stress on a different level. So there's the witness stress. There's a stress as a kid of worrying that the world is going to end, not being able to connect to your peers at times, having to tell on others and things like that. Uh, I guess, so what was your family life like, or your home life like? Was that where the stress was, or did you all have a pretty good time?
It was, again, at the time you don't know, you don't think, you're like, oh, like everybody's life is like this, and then you
Yeah, it's
realize you're like,
normal for
no.
you because it's all you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, no, it wasn't. It was pretty, not, I wouldn't say bad, because like there's other people that have it worse, right? There's always someone that has it worse, but it wasn't super easy. My dad used to drink a lot at that time, and so there would be like, we wouldn't see him for like weekends, like from like Friday to Monday. Sometimes like he was nowhere to be found, and so that caused a lot of stress, to like my mom, and financial stuff. And so we were like always like had these like little odd jobs, and you know growing up in Texas and stuff, there's not like a ton of social programs, so you really have to like scrape to get by. So that was I think stressful. And then in the congregation, or in the Kingdom Hall, I've always like said, and I've talked to my friends about this. I think there is like a two-tiered system, of like, you know, the haves and have-nots.
Oh
Sorry,
yeah.
whether it's money or like status, right? And so we had neither. So we were like on the bottom rung of the ladder. Like, we were expected to do a lot more and behave a certain way, because we were there by like the grace of God, other people like could kind of get away with more. So I think that was also very stressful. And I didn't I didn't notice it, but when I got older, I know my mom noticed it, and she would like, I think she became very sensitive to it, because if they did stuff to her, I don't think she would like mind it. She's a tough lady, but I think when she started affecting us, like her kids, that's when she became really like hypersensitive to like, you know, people treating us bad because we didn't have money, or our dad wasn't an elder, we weren't pioneers. And so I think that stressed her out, which in turn like caused her to bring it, to us. So
Well,
that was that.
sure. So how did she bring it to you?
So my mom, later on, she was diagnosed as having like manic depression, and
Oh,
like she's
okay. Yep.
bipolar.
Okay.
And this was, I don't think she officially got diagnosed until I was out of the house, right? But when you don't know, and now like I work in neurology, so I do like, I work at a hospital, do neuroscience stuff. So now knowing back, I kind of see that, and I'm like, oh, like this is why she was doing it. It was like she couldn't cope with it. She should have been on medicine or something, and that, and she was really volatile at the time.
Sure.
So that was like, I think that kept us on eggshells. So like the fact that I had to walk around eggshells around my mom, and the home life, like I didn't want to do that in school, and I didn't want to like invite more trouble than I had to. So
Hmm.
that was, I remember as a little kid having a lot of stomach problems and headaches. And now I know it was because of stress, but at the
That's
time I
so common.
always, yeah. And even till this day, like if something stressful happens in my life, like I get stomach, like I can't eat, my stomach is the first indicator that like something's off. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it is important to look at, all sides of a thing. And while it's true that there's always someone else out there that had it worse than you, like you said, that doesn't mean that what happened to you doesn't hold weight or have weight behind it. And it is, these are hard things for kids to live with. You don't have any mental and emotional tools to work with, you don't have any understanding. I mean, oftentimes our parents didn't have any understanding either. Like your mom didn't know what she was battling. Your dad wasn't around and everything. So sounds like a pretty tough time. But it sounds like you were also a kid that kind of, I don't know, Were you the kind of kid who kind of looked for the good, or maybe you found some escape in like school with the kids and stuff like that, or making friends and things? Like, was that an escape from your home life?
Oh, definitely, definitely. I mean, I remember, you know, going to like my friends' houses. Like I said, we had little kids that lived in the block, on our block, and so there was this one house that was like two houses over, and so that house was like, again, I think the military would rent that house and just put families in it for a while. So it was nice because there was always like some every couple of years there was like different families. They usually had kids because that's why they would put them there. And yeah, I remember when we first moved to the U.S. There was a family there, and they were from the Midwest somewhere. And we're very Hispanic. Like we are, when we got home, all we spoke was Spanish. Like everything was in Spanish. The meetings were in Spanish. So I would speak English at school, and then when I got home, my life was just in Spanish. And I would go to their house. the the best way I can describe it was it was like that show Roseanne. Like that's like kind of what their house was like. It was kind of very much. It was very different from ours. I'm like, oh, this is like people on that TV show. Like that's how they live. And like, and they would have like junk food and like buy pizza from a box. And I'd like they would eat ketchup on everything. And I thought that was so fun. I was like, oh my god, these people like drink soda every night. Now looking back, they probably had very unhealthy diets, but at the time, as you're a little kid, you're like, oh my god, this is so fun. Like they get to eat like chicken nuggets, and like I had to eat like food from scratch that my mom made every day. So you complain about that when you're a little kid, but but yeah, um, I would, I, I don't know if I would say escape, but I think it was a way to like, I would, in my mind, I would like, well, if I'm doing this, if I'm doing others, if I'm keeping myself busy and out of trouble, then I won't be stressing my mom out. And if that's one thing I can do to help her, then I'll do it. So
Hmm. It's a lot to carry as a kid, to have to carry the weight of your mother's emotions, or her mental and emotional health. That's a lot for a kid to take on. And especially since it sounds like your dad wasn't necessarily around to help with that. But again, they're doing their best. They're human beings, and they're just trying to find their way through lives too. Again, life isn't easy, and who taught them any better? They were probably working with the mental and emotional tools they had been exposed to in their life too. Um, it's just doesn't create a super healthy situation for anybody. But at the same time, it doesn't mean they're bad people or anything. So what did, I guess, what did going to the Kingdom Hall mean a lot to you? Did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy the activities in any way, or was that in any way a reprieve? Were you all busy in Jehovah's service?
I mean, we were, like I said, we were, my mom was not like a pioneer. My dad wasn't an elder, whatever, but we never missed like field service on, Saturdays, or like Sundays. We'd go on Sundays as well. And then whenever, I mean, we were pretty like my mom made sure that we were like involved, and in her mind, I know a lot of people are like, oh, like, oh, I hate the witnesses, whatever. I think, at least where we grew up, it was a very rough area of town. And so if we hadn't kind of been Jehovah's Witnesses, or if we hadn't kind of been raised that way, we'd probably be like in prison on drugs, like it did provide us with a little bit of structure that if we didn't have it, growing up, if we just kind of gone out, because a lot of the kids that I ended up were friends with, like in school and whatever, they ended up going to jail, and they ended up getting on drugs and everything. And so I think that was, you know, when you're a little kid, you're just like, oh, like, my mom just doesn't like him, whatever. But now, like, having a bird's eye view, you're like, oh, my mom saw that, like, I don't want to, I need to have friends, but not get too close, because, you can tell, like, who, what's going to be harmful to your kid. So, yeah, she kept us busy with that. And like I said, at that time, the hall where we were at, there was a lot of people, like, my brother's 12 years older than me. And so there was a lot of people his age, and then there was a lot of people my age. So there was a big mix. And so I remember we would always like have picnics, and we'd always like do stuff, growing up. So we weren't like super isolated, and we would always do uh on Sundays, like when the speaker came, um we would always go to someone's house, and like you were invited for lunch, and like sometimes it would be our house. Like my mom was a really good cook, so they would like always like invite them over. So I think that was really nice, that there was always something to do, so it was like a nice community. And I mean, I enjoyed going to the meetings. Like, when you're little, it's kind of boring and you just kind of sit there and, whatever. But I enjoyed it. As I got older, you're learning stuff. And, I think back in the day, it was a little bit more educational. Like they at least tried to like pretend like it was more like, you would learn from, what is it? Remember that blue book that talked about the Bible? Like, like it had like each book that was like,
Oh, all scriptures and
there we go. Yeah.
book, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and it went through the whole Bible. So you enjoyed learning about the different books and kind of, I guess, some of the history around it and such as you were going through that.
It was interesting because I remember like going to school around that time when we would do those certain things. We were learning about kind of certain, and it wasn't like super. It was, I mean, I was in school. It wasn't about the Bible, but it was like about certain things in history, right? And I'm like, oh, I heard that at the Kingdom Hall, because they would like talk about different things, and in school we also had, back in the day in Texas, in order, like every, like I think it was like fourth grade, eighth grade, and like 10th grade, they would give you like a test, which was like a state test, and it was like if you failed that, you weren't meeting the markers for being able to like pass on to the next grade.
Gotcha.
So that was a really big thing. It was like, it was the first kind of like teaching to the test and whatever. And so I remember the first time I took the test, like I did okay on everything. Like I was okay, but it was like on the reading portion, like I would score super high, like ridiculously high on those things. And they were like, what do you do? And part of the test was they would make you read a paragraph, and they'd be like, oh, find the main idea. And so you had to go and like highlight it. And I was like, we do this every week. Like, this is not hard. Like, I thought I would get done in like 5 minutes. And I couldn't comprehend that other kids had a hard time with it. And I'm just like, I do this like 5 times a week. Like, it's not hard, to find what the main idea in this paragraph is. So in that sense, like it helped, I guess. So it was good.
Hey, you learned how to underline things. Other kids learned how to have fun and be free and and enjoy their lives in ways. We all had what we had, right? And there are a lot of people point to public speaking as something that they learned through being one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Of course, there are lots of people who went through the theocratic ministry school who never ended up being better speakers. So it doesn't mean that it's just that. It's just that if you had a natural penchant for public speaking, you had an opportunity to hone some of that through forced speaking engagements.
Well, what's funny is like at work now also, we started a couple of years ago where we do these like kind of like committees and stuff. Like every department has to, it's ridiculous, but anyway, they make us do these like things where we have to have like a little meeting every month. And so I run it for my department, so like my boss is there and all my coworkers, and like you have to like make an agenda and like like preside over the meeting, whatever. And I just kind of started doing it, and my boss is like, you're really good at this, like no one knows how to do this. I'm like, I learned this like at church. Like, I don't ask, like I never went to like a business course, and like I do it for like the whole campus. I like run the meeting for like all the departments and stuff. And yeah, they're just like, I'm like, where did you learn how to do this? I'm like, believe it or not, at church. Like this is like the one good skill I could like remember from this is like how to run a corporation, because that's what it is. It's a corporation. So
yeah, absolutely. I learned how to run a scam. Teasing.
Pretty much. You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah. But you do learn how to organize your thoughts. You learn how to put them in a succinct manner at times, and how to express them, and how to organize different groups of people, especially if you're a brother and you ever have to organize service groups or create, go through the policy manuals for a particular responsibility you had in the congregation or whatever. There are certain things there that are very corporate that you do learn a little bit along the way, for sure. So I guess, how did things play out as you went toward, I don't know when you got baptized. How old were you?
So I got baptized at 9.
Oh,
We
wow.
were
You got
very
baptized
young.
young.
We were really young. So back in that time, it was like you just kind of did it. And I think, again, looking back at it, I think my mom wanted us to have that pressure because it would at least keep us from getting in too much trouble from, like getting in a gang or whatever. So I think it was intentional. It really was intentional. And, you know, one thing about, like, because we didn't like have a lot of money and stuff like that, we would always read. So me and my sisters like would always read, and even my brother, right? And so we were just very bookwormish. Like, we would read like witness stuff, but we would read other books, and we always like would go to the library because it was cheap and it was free, and that's was what we could do. And so when they're asking you like the baptism, it's not rocket science. Like, they're asking you these questions that are there, and it's like, I remember them asking me about like fornication or something, and I'm like 9. Like, what do I know? Like, I know how to regurgitate. Like, I don't know what it means. Like, how if I know? But yeah, I got baptized at 9, and it was.
But at the end of the day, it was about regurgitation, wasn't it? And a 9-year-old can't grasp all of these concepts or the weight of the decision that they're being pushed to make, but they can, at 9 years old, regurgitate information if programmed sufficiently. And so that's, wow, 9 years old. But think about, so 9 years old, what are you in, the 3rd grade? 5 is kindergarten, 6 first, 7.
Yeah, I was like in 3rd or 4th grade. 3rd or 4th grade.
Yeah. You're 3rd or 4th grade, so you're really, really little. Getting baptized, when you go look at a 9-year-old and think that they're about to make this lifelong commitment to an organization, really, that's so heavy. That's a lot for a 9-year-old to take on. Were you excited about it in any way? Did it mean anything to you, or did you just know this is kind of the thing that is it? Were you told to get baptized at 9? Were you pressured, or was it your own idea?
I don't think anybody told me like to do it, but I think, again, that was just like the next logical step, right? Kind of what you're expected to do, because they're like, well, if you love Jehovah, then you do this, and whatever, and like, well, I guess, I want to be a good person, so yeah, like, I'll do it, and I did it, and like, I remember we went, so back in the day, we would go. I think they would still serve like food at the conventions back then. It was like they would serve the sandwiches and the like the pudding and stuff like that. And I remember I didn't want to do it. I remember I think I got cold feet at the end, and it wasn't even like anything doctrinally. I was just like shy, because I didn't want to like be in front of everyone. It was really, so we would go from Texas. Our district conventions were in Arizona, so we had to travel like 6 hours to go to like Arizona, and it was in Tucson, Arizona. That's where we would go, because witnesses are the only nut jobs that want to go to Tucson in the middle of summer or like in July, right? So the city was like, sure, come on down, like, we love you, because we're crazy. And so we would go there, and I remember it was like in this big like Coliseum, the big like basketball stadium that they had there, and we would go. And I remember I was like, my mom got up really early so she could get me like a seat in the front, because she would sit in the bottom, that day. And I remember I was kind of getting up, and I was like, I don't want to do this. Like, I remember just getting up and getting my stuff, and I was like, peace out. Like, I was gonna go. And then on my way back, I kind of saw my friend. It was a guy who was like I was friends with at the hall, and he was there. And so then I kind of like changed my mind. Like, oh, I'm like, well, if he's doing it, like, I guess I'll sit with him and we'll do it. And like, we ended up getting like baptized. And he was older. He was like 14 or 15, and like we ended up doing it. Like the same day or something. But like if he hadn't have been there, I probably wouldn't have done it. I just would have like left.
So clearly a well thought out, sincere decision on your part to dedicate yourself
Clearly.
to the organization. Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you after you did it, did you feel better? Were you celebrated? Because for a lot of kids, when you think about it, getting baptized, that is your birthday. That is your holidays. That is the one time that you do a thing in the organization that sometimes people rally around you and they might even give you gifts or take you out to eat or make you feel special in some way. Did you get any of that?
I can't remember. If I did, it probably didn't stick with me in my mind, honestly. I just remember it was like something you were expected to do, so I did it. And then I remember because of that, then you could do more stuff in the Kingdom Hall. Like you could like pass out the microphones and like kind of do other things. So I was like, okay, like, that was, it just seemed like a next logical step, but it was never like, oh, I'm doing it, as like a celebration for us, or, maybe subconsciously, you're doing it, but at the time you're just kind of like, I remember it wasn't like, I did think like, oh, I should feel like a certain way afterwards. And I really didn't. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I must have done it. I did it wrong or something, but it wasn't. I don't know.
I get
It
it.
wasn't
Mine
like
wasn't
like
special either.
you know,
I don't remember doing anything special for it. Nobody cared. I mean, there were people who patted me on the back and were excited that I made the right decision or whatever, but there was no party or gifts or dinner
yeah.
or any of that. Some people have that. Um, it's just think at 9 years old, you're now a baptized male member, of course, of the congregation. And so now you can tell, older sisters what to do. And it's just insane to think about. You're 9 years old, and you now have this thing bestowed upon you, which does sometimes come with pressure, a lot of pressure, actually, for some kids.
It was weird. Yeah, like I always found that to be weird. That like after that, like if we were out in service or something, like they had to like cover their heads, or it was. I never really understood that. I'm just like I'm like they would look up to you like, well, what do we do? I'm like, well, I'm 10, so I don't know. You know, and it's very ritualistic. Like they know what
Yeah.
they're doing, but it's just like very like, okay, we're doing this, and I think that was like the first time when I started getting a sense of like, oh, there's a lot of stuff that we just do it for the sake of doing it. Like it doesn't really make sense, but I'm just gonna go with it because everyone else is doing it. But we all know this is bullshit, right? Okay, like let's just so we're on the same page. But okay, let's go.
I think that's a good point. There is a lot of things that we did that were bullshit, but we did it because we knew we were supposed to. I was older than you. I guess I got baptized at 14, I think, right before I turned 14. I think I was 13, right about to turn 14. And yeah, it's weird being a kid and having to lead groups of adults and such, or organize car groups or whatever, say a prayer after the meeting, and you're like, I'm a kid, what am I doing here? It's very, very strange. And you felt also, you could tell like these older women did not like you doing this. And I always felt fraudulent. I'm like, they know more than I do. What am I doing here? I'm a kid, but I was male and baptized, so I had to take the lead in certain ways at times. It's just it's so backward. It's such a weird situation, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. And when you're little, you're just kind of like when they tell you that's the way the world works, you're just like, okay, that's the way the world works. But
Yeah.
like I remember I really liked my teachers at school because I think the first time I ever had a male teacher was when I was in middle school. Up until then, all my teachers had been, it's a teaching is a heavily female profession, right? So I just always kind of thought it weird that like they couldn't teach at the Kingdom Hall. I'm like, but they can teach me about important stuff at school. Like I was like, I'm like, women are not stupid, right? Because they like teach me at school. Like they're very smart, ladies that I learned from. Like for some reason at the beginning, and I always thought it was weird because we actually had the lady that like gave me Bible because my parents didn't study with us. Like my mom didn't. It was like other people.
Oh, really?
And her her she was, again, when I was little, I thought she was that much older, but she was probably like 21 or 22 at that time. And she actually became a teacher. She was a teacher, I think, at that point. And so I thought it was weird that like she was a teacher. She was able to teach me up until I got baptized, and then I think like her husband or something had to like do it, and then it was like I outranked her, even though like she's like a very smart woman. Like she's an actual like teacher at school, and like she ended up going and getting like her PhD or something. And but even then, like she's lower knowledge wise or whatever than like someone who hasn't finished high school. But like she's like it was always really weird like that. That was I think one of the first times that I kind of felt like something's not right here. Something's not right.
Yeah, it's a very strange thing to be exposed to. So you're baptized at 9 years old. What is your trajectory then from there? So you were going to regular school. I mean, were you ever homeschooled, or did you pioneer or do any, were there pressures there to perform in the organization as
um
a 9 year old going into, your teenage years?
we never did homeschool. Again, my parents were big on education,
Right.
and so they knew like my parents knew like we're not teachers like in their minds, like even though my dad was really smart, he wasn't around. They were just kind of like, we can't show you what you need to learn. That's cool. Which again, I'm very thankful for because there's a lot of people who don't feel that way. Later on I learned it and they're like, oh, and like now those kids can't read and write and have crappy jobs because you know they didn't really get a good education. And I
Yeah.
think my mom also, she was she's very, she loved her kids, was very nice, whatever, but she was not a person because she had a very rough life. She was not one to like sugarcoat things for us. So I remember there was a lot of people that were like, you know, oh, I want to homeschool my kids because the association is so bad or whatever. And my mom was like, when they start working, they're going to work with the same people. So they better learn from it now. Like, they better, toughen up. And she was very, she knew the way the world worked. And so she prepared us for it, the nice stuff and the not so nice stuff. And she was just kind of was like, so I think I'm very thankful because I think the kids that were homeschooled, a lot of times they ended up doing worse things because they found another way, another outlet. Where for us, we kind of had that outlet. We had those friends, and we didn't grow up to be so weird. I grew up later, and like the kids that were like homeschooled, like didn't have like the social skills, to kind of like navigate in society because it was just them and a book and their parents. So, but no, like I went to school. In the summers, we would I guess when I got baptized, we probably would auxiliary pioneer, but I don't remember officially ever doing it. But we just kind of did it. Like if we weren't at school, if we weren't like doing some job, helping my parents work, any off time we had was like out in service. Like at least if it was during the morning, and then in the afternoon we could do whatever. But if we were off, we would go out in service, and that was just like you didn't even question it. Like you never were like, you know, I remember if I was sick, I would get to stay home and watch cartoons, and that was like fun. But then you got better, and you're like, okay, you got to go out. And so, yeah, I don't remember ever watching like cartoons on a Saturday morning because we were,
Gotcha.
yeah.
So your childhood kind of becomes defined or dominated by all of these different cult activities, going out in field service, going to the meetings, studying, all that kind of stuff. Did you? So how did things progress? I guess as you went on into your teenage years, uh, any seminal moments, anything that happened along the way?
Um, not really. I mean, when we were in middle school, when I was in middle school, so you know, my siblings were all 4 years apart, right? So my brother's 12 years older than me. My sister's 8, and then my other sister's 4. So we were never like in the same school, like at the same time, right? So my brother, by the time I was like 9 or 10, my brother was married. Like, so he got married, and like it was 95 and he was already out of the house and married. And so I remember there was problems that would come up with my siblings as they got older, and I would like, learn about it and kind of, it was like a warning, right? But yeah, no, I, I don't remember too much there being like a moment in like middle school or in high school. I do recall that I'm trying to think like in middle school, never, there was like, I think when I started getting into like girls and like, pressure about that, I think that was a little bit of like an issue. Um, because, there'd be like little girls would be like, oh, like, oh, let's go out, or, they'd be like, we're going out. Like, you don't go anywhere. You're just kind of like, formal, like in school, you're holding hands or something. But, that was kind of the big thing. Like, and I remember, I guess I remember really asking my mom, like, you know, they were like, hey, you're too young to date, which of course, you shouldn't be dating, like 12 or 13. Um, but even then they would be like, well, you can only date like, when you get married, it can only be like someone, from the Kingdom Hall, whatever. And I remember like telling my mom, I'm like, well, you didn't marry someone from the Kingdom Hall. Like, my dad's not a witness, like whatever. But then her response was like, she's like, yeah, and you see how this is turning out. Like, it's not the greatest thing. And I'm like, touche. Like, okay,
Well played,
so that
Mom.
was, yeah. So that was the only thing. Like, I guess, yeah, when you start getting, like friends and like girls and friends and stuff like that. But then, um, again, where we were at, they would do like drug raids in like my middle school, and they would like do like a fire drill where everyone had to leave, and then they'd bring like canines in and go through all the lockers, and like people, they would find drugs. It was mostly pot, but they would find like drugs in kids lockers, and like weapons and whatever. So it was, I guess, I had enough to worry about that I really couldn't pay attention to the witness stuff, like, like, oh, what's wrong with this, because like, you know I was like trying to not get beat up. Like, we had kids like in 8th grade that they were like 16, like they had been held back a lot, and so they were pretty, big. And it was kind of rough, like that area. So I think the whole time kind of growing up, I was always very thankful to be a witness, because I had that like structure, and I had, friends, and it was like safety. And, when my home life was crazy, like the Kingdom Hall was very stable. So growing up, I think I benefited a lot more from like the Kingdom Hall, that, versus if I hadn't had that in my life at that time,
Gotcha.
because it was just a measure of stability and structure that we didn't have in our life.
It kept you out of trouble,
Yeah,
so to speak.
yeah.
Not that it keeps everybody out of trouble. There are plenty of Jehovah's Witnesses that get into all kinds of trouble. But
Oh, of course, like,
for you, it was kind of a safe place, because you were already trying not to upset the apple cart. You didn't want to make your mom. You were trying not to add to your mom's stress by doing anything that would be considered wrong or whatever. So this kind of gave you something to do instead of those other things.
yeah. So yeah, so no, and I mean, and I do remember like that's when you really got to see the other kids, like the witness kids, like really get into trouble
Mm.
again, because I guess when you're little, you're like, or when you're a kid, people are like, oh, you're like afraid of the elders or what they're gonna do, whatever. Like, we were afraid of my parents. Like, the ultimate, fear was like not the elders, it was my mom. Like, you know, if she found out we did anything wrong, like, whatever anyone else did, like, would pale in comparison to like what was gonna happen if my mom found out. Like, that was just, the way it was. So, yeah, I remember, but I do remember that was kind of like weird, and then we would see like the other like witness kids that were still like in public school. They would, yeah, they would like start having like girlfriends, and that's when like the double kind of life was really, really apparent. And like
Mhm.
one of them was like, like the homecoming king, or homecoming prince, or something like that. And that's when I would get a lot of like pushback from like the other kids at school, because I'd be like, well, I can't do this, whatever. And they're like, well, so and so does it, like you should do it too. And I'm like, oh, and you kind of have to like, you don't want to throw them under the bus, because like they're they're trying to do what's best for them, right? But at the same time, you have to be like, well, there's different people, and not everyone's the same. You just kind of have to like, not only am I making excuses for myself, now I'm making excuses for other people's bad behavior, which is like not a good skill to have. Like, you need to speak up for yourself, and then let other people, you know, deal
Deal
with
with
their own life. But
themselves. Yeah.
yeah, so
So you
yeah.
see, I guess the Jehovah's Witness piece was there, but the Jehovah's Witness piece alone doesn't keep people out of trouble, doesn't make people follow the straight and narrow. This was Jared. This is who you were, and you were taking those stands in part because you were afraid of the consequences, I'm sure, at home, like you said, but also, this is who you were. And so the witness piece might have been the piece, but if it hadn't been the witnesses, maybe there would have been something else you would have attached to keep yourself out of it. Cause I think you just didn't want to get in trouble.
And I think that was my mom's kind of biggest thing too, like just keeping
Yeah.
us out of trouble. And knowing, like, looking back now, right? If you're not a witness, there's like the Boys and Girls Club. There are other things that people
Sure.
can do. Like, I remember there was kids that were like in the Boy Scouts, and they, so there were outlets. You just had to have people that were like invested enough to,
Right.
kind of keep you out of trouble. And that was one thing about, my mom. She tried to like keep us out of trouble the best she could, and I'm very thankful for that. But yeah, I don't kid myself into thinking that like, oh, the witnesses are the only reason like I'm not in prison. Like, if we hadn't had that, my mom probably would have still had common sense and like found other things to do, found other activities for us to keep involved with. That just happened to be what she
The
knew,
one.
and
Yeah.
it was free. So like, sure, we'd have to pay for it. Like, okay, let's do
um,
it.
so then I guess, how did things go when so the age of 18 ish, you're probably graduating high school or whatever the case may be. There are decisions to be made around that time in your life. Uh, how did things go for you? Did you decide to go a path of education because your parents did seem to value that? Or I guess, what was life like for you as you went through your upper teenage years into your early
So I
20s?
actually left home when I was 17.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, a lot of like, my brother was married at that point. He had been married for a long time at that point. And then my siblings, as they got older, like, I think my brother was one of those people, because he was the oldest. So the oldest kind of navigates the path for like the younger ones, right? Like, they like figure out, what's going on. Um,
As the
again,
oldest, I agree.
and so I think my brother, and I can't, speak for him, whatever, but I do think he got married very young. He got married at like 20, 21. I think part of it was they want to have sex, like everyone wants to have sex, right? And part of it was he wanted to get out of the house too, because it was not an easy environment. So if getting married is what gets you like permission, like, to leave, because also in the Hispanic culture, you don't leave when you're 18. You just don't do that. Like, I have I call him a friend, is like a witness guy. I mean, the guy's gonna be almost 60, and he still lives at home, and he's not like a loser. Like, he like, owns a bit. He's very, very successful. But the way the culture is, like, there's no reason to leave home or leave your parents unless you're gonna get married. And
That's what I
so
thought. Yeah.
yeah, so my brother got married because of that. And then as my sisters got older, they would like butt heads with like my parents a lot, with my mom especially. And so little by little, everybody would leave. And so when I was 17, I was the only one left at home. And I think, you know, my my mom's health really wasn't doing too good, like her mental health, and she was getting a lot more like volatile. And you know, at that time, you get to a you get to a point where it was like very physically like abusive, and you have these like manic episodes where you don't know what you're doing, you don't think. And she also had other, like, she was the diabetic, and she had all these other issues, like, right, that now I can see as an adult, like, makes you very moody. um but it got to a point where, like, I was physically like old enough where, like, I'm not gonna let you hit me for no reason. Like, I was a pretty, big guy at that point, and I was like, okay, like, this is stopping here. Like, this is no. And so, yeah, like, I had to leave home, and so I actually didn't finish my senior year of high school. Like, I didn't graduate. I just went and like got my like GED, and then I just started college afterwards, because of that. But it was really tough, because even though I was like a pretty good kid, and like I think I was even like trying to pioneer at that time or whatever. um yeah, my mom would do that, and you would go to the brothers, right? You go to the elders, because again, the elders are like the end all be all authority, even though they don't have any training. And like, she needed a doctor, she didn't need these people, right? And their response was like, you have to like obey your parents and like tough it out, and like, that was the first time that I learned very young that, like, elders' advice is not really good, you know? And so, like, if I felt like these were my parents, right? Like, they were telling me to do this, like, I can only imagine what they tell, like, a woman who's being beat up by her husband,
Hmm.
because that's the exact same thing they tell her, like, oh, well, just got to tough it out, and it's like, yeah, that was really rough. And so, yeah, I left home, and then it was rough for like a couple of years, because I, like, was working at a Wendy's or something, and trying to make something of my life. And
Where did you
uh
go when you left at 17? Where did you go?
so I had other friends that were like kind of on the same boat. And so one of my other friends, his brother had like joined the army, and then this other kid who was like around my age, we ended up getting like an apartment together. We like rented it from some brother, and like we rented, they had a little apartment on the side of his house, and we were like roommates. And it was really, like, I look back on it and I was like, oh my god, like, that was rough, and yeah, we did it. And I think eventually I went to go live with like my brother and like my older sister, and because they had like my older sister, my oldest sister had been like, had left too, like she had like been like kicked out or something, and so she was living with my brother, and she was like going to nursing school at the time. And so I kind of you know hung out with them and like kind of made it. But looking back, I remember I would find these like odd jobs, just kind of something that I could do. And um but yeah, it was rough. I remember that was like a rough time. And on top of that, like, I still made it to the meetings. Like, we still went to the Kingdom Hall, and we still like went out in service when we could. And we were like, it not being a witness was not an option. Like, we could do it. And so, yeah, that's
So you were
kind of
doing
what
it,
it
but
was.
you were hustling every
Yeah.
day to make rent and to try to live a life that, I mean, that's a lot for a 17-year-old to have to do. You said that you were working at Wendy's at a point. When did you, or I guess, how did things progress from there? Where did you go from living in this brother's apartment with a roommate? How did life continue to move forward for you?
So I lived with my, like, I, and that brother, that brother's apartment, and then like the guy that I was like friends with, they ended up leaving, like moving away. And then I think he eventually like joined the army and stuff too. And they were witnesses, but again, they were on the same boat. They're like, we need, and where we are, it's a very economically depressed area. Like, there's, people talk about like, oh, the Rust Belt, whatever. This is like 1,000 times worse, because you're right by the border, so labor is cheap. Like, you get paid nothing, because there's always someone that's going to do it, for a fraction of what you, and that's just kind of the way it is. And so, yeah, a lot of people would join the military just because that's a job. That's a job. It keeps you employed. You can go to college and stuff like that. That wasn't an option, obviously, for us to join the military. So I went to go live with my brother, and then afterwards, I got like a little stable job or something, and I went to go live with one of my mom's aunts in Mexico. so I would cross the border every day. So I would go live, and I would like pay her rent, which if you pay in like US dollars, it's a lot, more money, that. So
Right.
yeah, and she was an older lady, and she was like in her 70s at the time, and she had like a little apartment, or a little room on top of like her house. And so yeah, I would like stay there, and then I would drive back and forth every day, and just like go to the US, go to work, go to the meetings and whatever, and then just at night go back to Mexico. And I did that for like about a year or so, until I got like a more stable job. I ended up going to school after like like finished school. I got like a little certification to be like an EMT. It's like a summer course. And so after that, like, because I had to find a job right away, like a job that would actually pay, a living wage. Like working at, at a shoe store, whatever, that was not going to be an option forever. Like I knew, like I didn't want to do that. So yeah, I took this little course, and then that's how I got started in my career. I learned that, and then from there, I got hired in like a sleep lab, and I did sleep studies, and
Can I
going.
ask, how did you, because there may be someone listening who is really struggling to make ends meet. And I think a lot of times people who leave the witnesses, especially when young, they don't even know what's out there that they could do. So I don't know, for you, this seemed to be a path that took you, or a start of a path, a start of a journey. So how did you even know that EMT thing was an option? Where did you find the course? Like, how did you know did somebody point that out to you? Or, and is that
Um,
something that today could be a path for other people? Or have things changed over time?
I don't know. Like I haven't done EMT work, and I really didn't do
Sure.
it. Um, the reason I knew about like school and everything was when my sister, around that time or a couple years before, my sister, the one that's 8 years older than me, she was in nursing school, and I think I was sick one day from school. I didn't go to school for whatever reason, and she actually took me with her to college that day. And so she was like doing like a biology class or something, and I sat in on it, and it seemed really interesting. I'm like, oh, this is fun. They did like a little project. You could never do that nowadays, right? But this was like the 90s. They really weren't super strict. And so we went and did that. And I remember I didn't want to be at a desk, right? I didn't want to do like computer. I never really been good at math, so I was like, you know, didn't want to be like computer, kind of person. My dad, so my dad's an engineer, like in Mexico, he's an engineer. So they're really, really smart people. Like my brother, he went to become an engineer. Like one of my other sisters, she used to do like drafting and AutoCAD. So they're really, really good like with numbers. And like me and my other sister were like, we're healthcare people. Like we're not, like we need to be around, but like we're more
Sure.
like interaction with people, and like we're not, we're not cut out for that.
Good for
So
you
that's how
for
I learned.
recognizing that about yourself.
And then there was a brother in our hall that was the guy that I told you that's now like in his like 60s and still home. Back at that time, he was a fireman, and he worked for the fire department in the city, and he was actually, they were like, the fire department was sending him to school like part of his job to become a paramedic. So I remember kind of hanging out with him and everything, and like learning about this. I think that's where I got the idea, because I
Gotcha.
was like, oh, I want to be like him and be like a paramedic, whatever. And so that was like, I was getting, because you have to get that before you can become a paramedic. Like there's like EMT B, and then intermediate, and then paramedic. And I did that, and then, but unless you work for the fire department, like if you work just for a private ambulance service, the pay is like slightly above minimum wage.
Mm.
Like I'm not joking. Like back then it was like 5.15 an hour or something. And if you worked in an ambulance, like having people's lives in your hand, and doing all these really hard, like they would pay you like 5.35 or five. It was nothing. And so I applied for this other job, and I it was by sheer luck that I came into the profession I'm in now. I learned to do sleep studies, and then from sleep studies, I learned to do like the brainwave testing. That's what I do now. So yeah, but it was just by sheer luck that I kind of fell into it. But I mean, as far as schooling would go, even though I wasn't at home anymore, I think my dad paid for that course because he realized like it was important. So like he paid for me to take that course, and yeah, that was
Hmm.
kind of what I did. But just I worked, and it, and because we had that stress like in my family life, like growing up, like about money and stuff like that. Like I wasn't naive. Like I knew things cost money. I knew people were shitty. So like, even though I left home earlier than I wanted to, I wasn't like ill prepared. Like none of us were like, oh my god, defenseless. Like we don't know what this is. Like because my mom had like made sure we knew the world was a tough place. And so again, not ideal circumstances, but I had the tools, to
Gotcha.
deal with it.
Yeah, you didn't go out there naive, and so hopefully that helped you not to be taken advantage of at times.
Yeah, yeah.
Though most
That
people are generally good, but um, depends on the area. I'm sure, like you said, it was a rough area, and maybe it could have been a bad situation for you, depending on what you knew to look out for or not. So, where do you go from? So you're now working and making hopefully some, like you said, some more, I guess, stable money, something that you could rely on a little bit more. Do you go move out on your own, or do you keep living with other people?
so I was living still with my aunt, or my mom's aunt in like Mexico, and then I started this job, and then we kind of like made amends with like my parents and stuff, and actually they had like a house like in Texas, and at that time my dad got a job and he moved to Dallas, or his job moved him away like to Dallas, and so like where El Paso from Dallas is like 11 hours or 12 hours away, like in the same state. You're like, Texas is huge, right?
Texas is
So
ridiculously big.
yeah, so it's like 12 hours away, right? And so like I ended up moving back home. Like my family didn't live there anymore. They had like a little apartment in the back, and so I would pay them rent. So there was, it went from like a child relationship to like an adult relationship really, really quick. I never had like the teenage years or whatever. It was just like, boom, one day you're a kid and then you're not. And then I eventually ended up moving out there as well because the company that I worked for, they had a position out there, and that would, so like, yeah, when I worked for the ambulance, like I said, I was making like $5 an hour, 5.15 or something. And then I got this job at like doing like sleep studies, and I think they paid me like $9 an hour. I was like, wow, this is so much money. I was like, well, at that time, like, because again,
Sure.
there was like friends, even at that time, where like my really good friend, she was in college and she was finishing like a finance degree, um, and she couldn't find a good job that paid her more than like $6 an hour. So I was really fortunate to kind of, find what I did at the time. And so then I ended up moving out east as well because the same company, like, they hired me to do this other job, and it was like almost double the pay or something. It was ridiculous. And like, okay. And so I lived out there. I moved to Dallas and my family was there. And it was more like my sister had gotten married, and so my because she went back and lived with them for a little bit, and then she got married, and so they were like, enough time had passed where I'm like, okay, I can like kind of live with my parents again. And but by this point, I had already been on my own for like 3 or 4 years. By the time I moved out with them, where I could only live with my family for like 4 months, and then I had to find my own place. I'm like, this because at that point I was used to being an adult. I was used to like coming home whenever I wanted, and then so they're like, you have a curfew. I'm like hell I do. Like, so then I just moved out on my own, and then, yeah, I've never lived. So since the age of 17, I think I lived with my family for like 4 months after that. And then, I'm 36 now. I've lived on my own for like 20 years.
Okay. So how did your adulthood progress? I mean, you're here talking with me. So at some point there must have been some changes. So what were some of the steps along the way of your path?
So when I was in Texas, when I was still in El Paso, and I living on my own, we moved to the English Hall, kind of where in the area where we were living at, and where we were at, in El Paso, the there's like for every one English congregation that they have, there's like 15 Spanish ones. Like it's ridiculously out proportion. So we went to an English one, and that was like, I guess you would say that was where the need was. Like the English congregations were there because it was like very old. It was like had been one of the first ones, and it had been like dying out because that was a very like English white speaking area, and with time, like it just became less and less and less, and most people speak Spanish. Like we're in the U.S., so they speak English, but when it comes to like religious stuff, they go to church in Spanish. You know, you have these two cultures where like people will speak English in their professional life, but then in their personal life, they speak Spanish. So if you're going to talk to
Interesting.
them about God, they'll listen in Spanish, right? So we went to this English hall, and then I moved to Dallas, and then at that time they were like really big into like they were pushing foreign languages a lot. This was like 2006, 2005, 2006. And they were like, you should learn a foreign language and blah, blah. And like, I was moving to a really big city where there was like all these different languages. And so I was like, okay, you know. And so I remember going with my sister to the meeting because she was already married, going with her to her meeting, you know, with her husband. And they went to the English. My brother in law's black, so he doesn't speak Spanish. So they were always in the English hall. And I think they had the circuit overseer visit, and I was like, oh, like, you know, what, like, is there no, like a foreign language that, you know, we could do? And he put me in touch with someone, and I ended up going to a Portuguese hall.
Hmm.
Like, there was starting like a Portuguese congregation because there was a lot of Brazilians that live in Dallas. And so, yeah, I ended up, when I moved to Dallas, I moved to a Portuguese congregation. And I was already a ministerial servant by that point. So I was like 21, and, you know, I was a ministerial servant, and I went to that Portuguese hall. Um, Funny story. So I this is like not one of my proudest moments, but again, this just shows you like how weird the witnesses are. So I get there, and like it was a very tight knit group, and it was like a lot of young people. So it was a lot of people in their 20s, right? That would go into this hall. So it was like a couple of elders and then just like a bunch of people. And they were all like pioneers and like ministerials. And so we had like the congregation was like 40 people, right? And we had like 5 elders and like 20 ministerial servants and like 30. It was ridiculous. It was just, it was people that really didn't want to go out in service and do anything. Like they would just go there and pretend like they were doing something, right? And so we would go there, and there was, I went to the hall, and then we still had the book study at that time. And so we would do the book study on Saturdays before we go out in service. So like the book study was before service, and then we go. And it was like at this family's house, and like they had like a young daughter, and I was like 21 and she was like 19, and she was like interested in healthcare, and we meshed really, really well, me and her, like, you know. And clearly if you're a witness and you're like 20 and 19, they're like, this is, you should date, like this is the perfect, you know, thing. And so I was like, okay, like we should date, you know, like, and mind you, there was a, when I first got there, there was like this couple that they were getting married, like in the point, that was like a big deal. Like they, you know, were the ones getting married and blah, blah. And so it was like, once I got there and I kind of started dating this girl, everyone was like, oh, well, after, you know, these people get married, like it'll be Jared and, you know, this girl's turn. Right. And so I went out with her and whatever. And again, after like a couple of dates, you know, after a couple of times, I knew we like we were good friends, but I'm like, we weren't gonna, you know, it wasn't gonna go past that.
Sure.
So then I gotta break up with this girl. Like I have to break up with her. And I was like sweating in because you don't want to like hurt someone's feelings and whatever. And you know, we were out in service one day, and I was with this group, and like another girl in the service group was like, um, I said something like, oh, I gotta save money, you know, because I wanted to go on a trip or something. And I said like, oh, I gotta save money. And then this other girl was like, oh, she's like, are you buying a wedding ring? Mind you, we've only been dating like 4 months. And I was like, no, like that is the furthest thing. And she's like, oh, don't worry, I won't say anything. You know, when they're like, they say they won't say anything. And of course they're gonna go blab about this, right? And I was like, I gotta wake up with this girl today. If not, she's gonna be expecting like a wedding ring, you know, like. And so I was like sweating bullets, and I didn't know how to do it. And it was a Sunday. I remember it was a Sunday. We had the meeting. I actually gave the talk that day, like in the Kingdom Hall. And then they read these letters like after the talk. It was like Hurricane Katrina had happened, and it was like a long like 5-page letter, like if you want to send a fridge or whatever. And I didn't know how to break up with this girl, right? And I was like, I can't be alone with her because you're a witness. You're always supposed to have like a chaperone. I'm like, but I want to break up with her with like a chaperone there. That's, you know. So I had to find a way where I could talk to her alone, but not be alone with her, but like not make it like, hey, come meet me by yourself, you know, because it was just gonna be. Anyway, she gets up during the middle of the meeting. We're like in the foyer, and I was like, well, now's as good a time as any. And I broke up with her like in the middle of the meeting.
That is brutal. Oh my goodness. I mean, you see how, I mean, just think about just breaking up with somebody. When, as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, are you ever taught how to say no or how to self-advocate? That's just not something that happens. You go down paths that are defaults or prescribed for you, and then you're expected to continue going down those paths. So, and the relational stuff is so cringy and weird with the chaperones and all that stuff. Wow, broke up in the middle of the meeting.
Like after that, I was known as like the guy. Like even people that I didn't know, like in the city, they'd be like, "You're the one that broke up with the girl in the middle of me." I'm like, "Yep, that was me." Like, you know,
how did she react?
she took it rather well. Like I thought, you know, because she didn't like storm off or start crying. And obviously, we were in the Kingdom Hall, so like looking back, obviously was very insensitive on my part. Like I, you know, but I wasn't doing it with like the intention of like, oh, I was just like, you know, in my mind, I was like stressing and like the permutations. I'm like, well, this is the only reasonable, you know, I got to get it done today, right? So yeah, she was like fairly pissed like afterwards, and like even the day after, like I had to go meet her mom for lunch, and like the mom was crying, and she was like, you know, you need, you know, you guys should stay together and whatever. And I mean, it was crazy. And this was like one of the things that for me was a huge red flag, right? Was when you're a witness, right? There's no date. Like for me, at least, you know, at that time, also, dating is getting to know someone in view to marriage. Like you're not married. So you should be able to break up if you don't like them, right? Which is a very unwritten rule in the witness that like once you start dating, you don't break up, right? Like, you know, you don't do it. And so I didn't see it that way because I was like, I'm not going to get married. And like, I knew what an unhappy marriage was because I saw it, you know, from my parents. I'm like, I'm not going to get married to like someone, you know, and my brother had done the same thing. He got married. They were married for like 8 years and then they split because they just weren't compatible. And so I was like, that's not going to be me. So yeah, that was rough. Like, you know, I actually had to move halls from that because like it was just
Not
like it was such a
surprised.
it was a very tight knit group. So I ended up going to like the Spanish hall that we had come because when I got there we were a group and then it became a congregation. So I just went back to where like and I was there for like years and it was actually it ended up being really nice and like it ended up being a lot better. But yeah, so that was like one of the first things like I lost like all my friends. I remember telling my friends, I was like, I'm the only like disfellowship person that can give a talk. Cause I was like, I would give a talk and then afterwards, like no one would talk to me. Like it was pretty brutal.
But no pressure, Jared. I mean, they don't put pressure on people to get baptized or to marry people or whatever. They don't, there's no pressure. You know, it's funny how they act like everything is normal. It's not normal at all. It's not normal in the slightest. This isn't how most people act. You can break up with someone and you don't, someone that you've dated for a few months, you can break up with them and it shouldn't cost you your entire social network.
And I see that now, right? And at that time, even that time, I thought the reaction was a little extreme. I'm like,
Sure.
really? Like, you know, she should be the one with hurt feelings, which I understand. I'm like, not everyone else. Like, I saw the meddling in that part, and I really didn't like it. Um, so yeah, that was really. But for me, that was just like a funny story. And like at that time, it was like really like stressful. But
Oh
now I
yeah.
look back and I'm like, oh my god, that was like, you know, and there's other reasons why it would not have like worked out, but
Sure.
that was like a big reason. But yeah, but now I saw that, and anyway, so then like I was, you know, I went to the Spanish hall. Um, I became I was in ministerial servant in the Spanish hall, and then I went to Ministerial Training School. So I went to MTS uh, around that time, and the only reason I did it was there was a brother that we would hang out with, like in the Spanish hall. He was an elder, and he had gone to MTS, and he was a complete moron. And like I did it out of spite, and I'm like, it's not rocket science. Like they'll take anyone. Like And so I applied. Right, I thinking like because you hear stories like, oh, people like I always wanted to go, and I applied like 5 times and never got in. And I was like, I'll show him. Like I'll go. And I was thinking like they're never gonna call me, but I shut him up. And then sure enough, they call me. I'm like, crap. Like now I got to go to this thing.
You went to MTS school out of spite?
Out of spite. Like I watch a lot of Seinfeld, so like that's a very George Costanza thing. Like
yes, do the opposite of everything that is you or that you want to do.
I'd done stuff out of spite, so I did that. And I went to the school. It was in Houston. It was in Spanish again, so I was like in a Spanish class. And it was interesting. So it was that was, I would say, a very eye-opening experience for me as a witness, because you get to see behind the scenes. Like going into it, I thought it was going to be very like, you were going to study, because they ask you to read like the whole Christian Greek scriptures before you go. So you're supposed to like read the whole thing, or not the whole Bible, but at least the Christian Greek scriptures. So like, okay, so you think it's going to be very like theology based, like you're going to learn, they make it sound like, oh, you're going to become such a spiritual person, whatever. And all you're doing is reading old watchtowers and old cans. Like they'll mention one little reference in the Bible, and then it's like 50 million cans or whatever. And it's all the same. Like you're reading the same watchtower like 20 times, right? So they're ingraining it into you. And so I remember going into it, and again, people are like, it's going to be really hard. I had been a pioneer, so I'd gone like pioneer school, when I was like 15 or something. And so at this point they were like, oh, it's going to be really hard, and blah, blah, blah. And I get there, and it's just like all the same watchtowers, just like in different formations. And I had gone to college by that point. Like I had like my undergrad in biology. And so I was like, a lot of the people I was with in class, they were like, oh, like, isn't this so hard? And I was like, not really. Like it's the same. And like, once you've read it once, I don't see why you're reading it 3 times. Like it's not going to change. Like nowhere at no point in this education is ever going to be like, oh, fornication's okay under these circumstances. Like, no, like it's, like, I don't know. And so it was a lot of like how to run a business, how to run a meeting. Like, so a lot of stuff that I do at work now, like how to make an agenda, how to run a business, how to preside over a meeting. That's what I learned. So I use that in my day-to-day life. So I didn't really learn too much doctrinal stuff, right? And then at the time in MTS, they were like, because they give you a little test, they give you like tests that you have to pass. And somewhere in Bethel, I have a score, of like what I graduate on these tests. And so anyway, but they were teaching you like certain like, oh, the parables mean this, and this, and the antitype and the type and whatever. And at that time, there was watchtowers that were coming up that were changing it, right? And so we were in class, and I was like, well, what's the right answer? I'm like, because you're teaching us this, but the watchtower is actually just saying this new thing. Like, which one is it? And the brothers were like, we'll just put the old one, because that's what that's what's on the curriculum, whatever. And I was like, okay, so it really doesn't matter. Like, this is not, And so, and another thing they engraved in MTS was Jehovah values unity over being right. And it sounds really pretty. It's like that's a very pretty bow to put on a big turd, where it's just like Jehovah, even if you're right, Jehovah, you'd rather be united than prove your point. And it's a way to keep cohesion as like the elders or like ministerial servants. So like, even if someone's doing something wrong, as long as it's not like outlandishly wrong, you just kind of go with it, because you'd rather be united than like be right. And it's a really weird like thing that they teach you. But I didn't always agree with that. I'm like, because if someone's doing something wrong, you're supposed to speak up. Like,
That's what I thought. It's the truth, right? I thought that being right would be valued. Of course, in a cult, unity is going to be paramount.
yeah. And so that, yeah, so they would teach us that. And it was very much like, um, you get to see how like the sausage is made, with like the, how the things are and, whatever. And then that, I think that was for me, it had the opposite effect. Instead of coming out more like, oh, I'm going to be like a witness, I was like, I don't know if this is for me. Like, I don't really like what I'm learning. Everyone was really nice. Like, the people were really nice. Like, I made like friends there that, like they still some kind, like, so I want to say when I say shunned, I'm shunned light. It's like the Diet Coke of shunning. Like, I'm not, officially disfellowship. So people know, like, I'm not on the up and up, and they know about my life, and so they're very selective in like how they interact with me.
Hmm.
So I'm not there.
So
There
you're
is
soft
people in my life,
shunned.
soft, but there's people that like will not talk to me, like they know. But there's other people that like if it's convenient for them, they'll like reach out, and then like you know
Ooh, what does that mean if it's convenient for them?
because I work in healthcare, there's a lot of people that always ask me questions. Like, I'm not a doctor, but for some
Hmm.
reason, if they have like a concern, they'll ask me,
Which
about it.
means if they need free medical advice, they will
Exactly.
approach
Yeah.
you. Isn't it? I mean, isn't that how it is? Even if you're disfellowshipped and shunned, your family can still reach out to you for necessary family business, which means anything that the family member needs from you, it's a one-way street. They can reach out to you for money, support. I mean, there's so many disfellowshipped and shunned people who support their family financially and such, because the family can reach out to you for support or whatever, but you're not really allowed to reach out to them for anything, right? It's a one-way, very culty street, and it's quite abusive, honestly. But yeah, I can see how if you're shunned light, that's going to create a situation where people are still going to reach out to you because there's something that they want or need from you, typically. Allow me to break in here for a second. This channel is made possible by you, the listener. If you appreciate what we're doing here, please consider supporting at patreon.com/shunned or leave a review on iTunes or other platforms. Like and subscribe. All those things help the channel. If you're looking for merch, you can go get some Shunned swag from the shunnedpodcast.com website or reach out there to be on the show. If you're looking for more ex-Jehovah's Witness content, I'll recommend my first podcast called This JW Life. You can find that on podcast apps as well as YouTube. And if you're feeling stuck in life, struggling to find happiness and community, maybe you're haunted by the past, beating yourself up, unsure of who you are or what you even want out of life now that you've lost this one identity that was given to you by a cult, reach out through my other sites like ex-JWhelp.com, that's ex-JWhelp.com, or storyworkscoaching.com. And let's see about working together to help you find a life that fits you and who you are, maybe for the first time ever. And now, back to our guest.
Yeah. And so I have like, when I was like close to like leaving, years later, there was a, like a sister that I knew from like the Portuguese Hall in Dallas. I was already living here in Seattle by that point, and she called me out of the blue again. This, once people hear you're not doing so great, they kind of like, and she reached out to me, and she was very much like, oh, like I guess her roommate got sick. She's an older sister. Like, oh, her roommate got sick and had a stroke or something, was in the hospital. And she was asking me like, hey, what's going on? Why are they doing this? Like, I think they put her in a coma, like a medically induced coma. Anyway, so she was asking me questions, and so I called her on the phone. And I'm like, hey, what's up? It's easier than texting. I'm like, oh, what's up? She's like, well, this and this happened. And so I told her, I'm like, well, the reason they're doing this is because of this, and you want to stop the process of the brain and this med. I explained to her like in detail, like what was going, because it's very scary if you don't know what's going on. You just
Sure.
see a family member with a tube down their throat. You don't know what's going on. So I explained it to her, and then she said something that like threw me off of like over the edge. So right as we're done having the conversation, I kind of put her mind at ease, whatever. And I don't know why it bothered me so much, but at that point, like I think I was already like not really in it. She said, oh, I'm going to pray that Jehovah give the doctors and nurses the wisdom they need to like take care of my friend, whatever. And I freaking lost it on the phone. And I was like, you know where they get that knowledge as well? I'm like, through medical school and through nursing school. And I'm like, that's where they get the training to take care of your friend. I'm like, and I even told her, I'm like, aren't you glad that the neurologist didn't miss the stroke section because he had a convention that day? Like, you sure are glad that he didn't like, oh, I can't learn about strokes because we have a district convention. I'm like, you're very glad that he like stuck it out and learned about this. I'm like, because some like this is actually important, you know? And she, I like laid it into her and she was like, okay, well, thank you, bye. And then I like never heard from this person again. But that really, that really bugged me about, medicine. That was one example that I can remember how like it's very selective. And I think there's other people nowadays, like there's even a guy that I'm pretty sure he's not like everyone else that I know from like MTS, like with the years that they know, like they kind of see like on Instagram and I have a beard now. They like, cut me out completely. And this guy, he's like still like pretends like he doesn't know something's going on and he'll like text me, but then he'll text me about things that like, he would never tell another witness. But because I'm not, like on the up and up, like it's okay. And, I think he feels safe enough to kind of like confide in me, which that's the only reason I don't really take a stand. Like, no, I'm not gonna, because I think there are people that need this in their life. And if I can be a gateway to like help someone come to their senses and leave, or make a decision that they actually want to make, I'm all for it. Like, I don't mind people using me in that sense if I can like help them, make their life better by realizing what they're in about.
And so, do you do a lot of that? Do you do a lot of unwitnessing, so to speak? Do you?
It's so funny. I was actually so with this, like I said, I have certain witnesses, like that guy, um, at my job, I've had interesting experiences where it's been, because I work in healthcare, right? I The blood transfusion issue comes up a lot. I remember like I see my evolution, right? From when I was a witness, I was like, no, like, I've never like I remember when I first started, like my first job, I was like, I don't even want to participate in a blood transfusion. Like I thought it was that
Right.
wrong. And then the more I learned into it, I'm like, well, I'm not gonna let someone die just because I don't believe in it. Like so then I became like, well, I'll help, I won't do it for myself. And then later I moved out, I learned like, once I learned that everything's not on the up and up, I'm like, screw this. Like, if I need blood, I'll take it, But there was an occasion years and years ago, I wasn't living here at the time, where this patient, because it's very easy to tell who's a Jehovah's Witness because they'll have it on their chart, like this person's part of a bloodless program or no blood, or, they'll make it very obvious. And I work with critically ill patients oftentimes. So blood, they're going to need a blood transfusion at some point. And so they didn't want blood. We could tell that they were going to need blood. They were very anemic. They needed it, right? And so once you say, I don't want blood, and you're an adult, right? The hospitals are so busy. They're going to be like, okay, you don't want it, fine. They'll move on and, they'll try their best.
Sure.
Where I could kind of tell that the whole blood thing was not 100%. It was like, I don't want it, but I want it. And it was only like, you have to, why they're saying no, right? And so the family was there and everything. And I remember talking, to this patient, and we were alone. Like I was, doing stuff. I was like fixing some equipment that I had to do. And I remember telling them, and I'm like, there's laws in this country that protect your health information from ever getting out. I'm like, it is a big thing, HIPAA, and like no one can ever, unless you want them to, like no one can ever divulge anything that you do. And I'm like, and you don't have to, like, your family's here. I'm like, you can have them not come for a day if you don't want them to. And like, you can say, don't let my family in this day, basically I was telling them, I'm like, if you want it, there's ways that you can do it without anybody ever knowing, and And I didn't tell them like, oh, I was raised a witness or I'm a witness,
Sure.
obviously, because then they'll be like, no, the devil, and
Well,
I
of
was just like,
course.
no, so I just played stupid, like, oh, I don't know, but I was like, there's laws that like will protect you, and like you can like have the door closed if you want, and like it'll be very, it's just between you and your doctor, and whatever. And I'm like, and even if you have a bad reaction or whatever, they don't have to tell your family what you had the bad reaction to. They can just be like, whatever. And so they ended up getting the blood transfusion. And I think till this day, that's probably, at the time I was very conflicted because I was still kind of like in and out, whatever. And I remember my rationale being, I'm doing this for the right reasons. Like, I'm telling this person to do this. If it ends up that I'm wrong, first of all, I thought, if I'm the one pressuring this person, if I'm the one helping this person do it, in my mind, I was like, well, Jehovah's not going to be mad at them. He'll be mad at me. And I'm like, I'm fine with it. Like, he's going to kill me anyway. Like, I'll take the blame. Like, just let this person live. Like they're in a very shitty situation, on top of this, like, it's worse.
Hmm.
So, yeah. And I've done that. And I had another one years ago where I had a lady where I was like working at this hospital, and she kind of sat down next to me, and she placed down like, it was like a brochure, and I had quit going by that point. But it looked very, you can tell when it's like a Jehovah's Witness brochure because
Oh,
it's like
sure.
a family and like a question like, will suffering ever be? I'm like, like it's not like, you know. And so I was like, oh, what's this? And she's like, oh, like someone gave it to me and blah blah blah. And again, I don't say like, oh, like I, was written. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I always say like, oh, I think what I say, oh, my brother was a Jehovah's Witness because it's true. Like I'm not lying. I'm like, oh, my brother was Jehovah's Witness. And then I was like, oh, I just kind of tell them like, oh, I heard about this, and have you ever wondered about that, and just kind of like, maybe you should look into it, a little bit more detailed. I'm like, because they're not always telling you like, you know, what it is, right? And then she kind of did it, and then like weeks later, I saw her, and she's like, oh, thank you for telling me that. She's like, yeah, these people got really clingy, and like I had to like tell them to stop because they got too like, they were always coming to my house and always calling me and whatever. And I was like, yeah, it's kind of like a stalker boyfriend, huh? And she's like, yeah. And so she's like, kind of cut it off. So those are just a couple of
Nice.
examples that I can think of, like that I've.
Nice. And if you think about it, like the person who needed the blood transfusion, uh, you didn't tell them that they had to do it. You weren't pressuring them to do it. You were just showing them how they could do it if they made the choice that they wanted to do it.
And they
Because they're
wanted
not
to.
they're not given those options. They don't even know they have a choice because there's only ever been one choice given to them, right? And so just letting them know, hey, there are ways and means of doing things if that's what you want to do. Uh, you're just giving a person options. They get to make the choice. They still have to decide to say yes or no.
Yeah, no, that was true. And so I think that those are a couple instances where I was like,
Yeah.
you know, where my life went from like actively recruiting people into where like I like actively recruit them out or like keep them from doing it. So yeah.
So let me ask, so what woke you up? I mean, you talked about some of the things that brought doubt up in your mind, but what were some of the things that actually made you realize that this isn't the truth? This isn't necessarily true, or that it's not something that you want to be a part of anymore at all?
um I would say it's, I don't think there was ever like this one big thing that was like
Sure.
but I don't know if you're the one that says it. I heard it somewhere, but they say it's like death by a thousand cuts. Like it's
Oh, yeah.
not like one little thing, but it's like a bunch of so like all that stuff from growing up. I always, when I came into adult, I'm like, I always knew like, like I always, by the time I got to adulthood, I knew like, okay, there's like what we say as witnesses, and then there's real life, So then you're like, but then you're like, well, the doctrine is much more. Um, so after I went to MTS, I got assigned because I knew Portuguese. They actually assigned me to a Portuguese hall in California. So I had to move to California from Texas, which again, it's something I would not have done so on my own. So I'm kind of thankful that it worked out that way because if it hadn't been for that, I'd probably still be, where I was raised, or in
Sure.
Dallas, and just kind of. So I went to this Portuguese hall in the middle of nowhere. I mean, this was like they were all from the Azores at this point. It's a dairy farming milk, community. It's like in the Sacramento Valley. So when I went on Google Maps the first time, this was like 10 years ago, I had to zoom in like 7 times just to see. It's like a little town off the highway. And I had come from a city, right? And so I go to this like farming town. All there is cows. Like we would go to dairy farms, and it was really rural, and it was an interesting experience for me. I saw the people were very nice, extremely nice. Like these were salt of the earth, like nice people, because again, I think when you're in an immigrant community, their life is already hard enough on the outside that they're not super shitty as witnesses, because like they have enough problems in their day-to-day life that so I met these people. I would say the hypocrisy of it really, really started to bug me at that point. Um, so we were in this hall, right? I was 25. They sent me to this hall. Again, what does a 25-year-old know about life? But they sent me to help out, and so I was like I was an elder by this point, so I was one of 3 elders in this hall. And there was like another hall that was in Sacramento, like 2 hours north of us, right? And so you had all these like witnesses, and they'd be like, we just want to go help out where like the need is great, and they were like in Portuguese and whatever. And I'm like naive still at this point. I've always like assumed the best in people sometimes. And I was like, oh, like we're in this hall. Clearly they sent me from Texas. Like I don't know jack shit. Like there must be a need, so you should come out. And yeah, we had like the hall where I was at. It was like the only 2 non-native Portuguese speakers were me and like another brother's wife. Everyone else was like fresh off the boat Portuguese, like, that was their first language and whatever. And so you'd meet all these other halls, like had people that wanted to learn the language, right? So they'd have maybe like one Brazilian family or one Portuguese family, and then there was like 40 other like English learners. And so I was like, oh, if they want to come help, like they should come here. And like, we're all from Portugal and whatever. They would not go there because it was a very small, rural, it was a very unsexy place. It was not like, you weren't going to get accolades for going. So I remember there was like people that I would meet, and they're like, yeah, I want to go serve in Portuguese and whatever. They're like, so I'm going to go live in Rio for like 6 months. And I'm like, okay, then you don't really want to help out. You want to go live in Rio for 6, which is fine, but just call a spade a spade. Like, don't pretend like you're, you know, you know, and guys would do that. A lot of guys I saw that were really not nice people to be around. Like they would go to these other countries, and it wasn't just Brazil, it was like other foreign countries. They go and like get a wife there and marry her and come back. And it's like, if a girl in the United States that speaks your language, that knows your culture, won't give you the time of day, there's probably a reason for it, you know? And yeah, they were just like shitty people, and they go and I guess I learned with time that if you want to be a successful elder, you really have to be a crappy person, like, or you have to be okay with crappy things happening and not do anything about it because you're part of the elders, you're doing it. And so yeah, I was there for a year. I didn't like it. I lived with like, I had a roommate situation with like another, he was like not scamming us out of rent because I knew what I was getting, but they were pretending to be something like they weren't, right? And so basically he would like rented me this room like in his house, which was fine. Like I needed a place to stay, so I rented a room, and it was very much like, okay, this is what I'm paying and this is what I'm doing. And then he had two other brothers like move in, like two other young kids kind of move in, at the same time. And so we were in this house with all these like witnesses, and basically me and the other two guys, we were all pioneers. Like I was the MTS person, they were pioneers. Like, I didn't have a super good job because I was pioneering full time. So I would find little odd jobs here and there in my field, but still it was like one day a week or something, and make that money last. It's very
Sure.
expensive to be a pioneer. That's what I can tell people. Like pioneering is very expensive
Yep.
because you're using your gas, you're using, you're paying for stuff.
I had to
Um,
stop because I couldn't afford it anymore. So I understand.
Yeah. And so basically it ended up that we were paying this guy's rent, right? For the apartment. So he made it seem like, oh, we're all paying the same amount. And then I talked to these like brothers and I'm like, we're paying the rent at this apartment, right? They're like, no, we're all paying the same. I'm like, no. I'm like, property values are this. Like, this is what a rent costs for this apartment. If you're paying X amount, I'm paying X amount, whatever. So basically that's what we were doing. So he could go to like Brazil and like find a wife and get married and blah blah. Which again is not wrong, but just be upfront about it. Don't it's like don't in Spanish they say te venden gato por liebre, which means they're selling you a cat pretending it's a rabbit. Like, don't sell me something and pretend it's something else. Like, if you'd just been honest, then people can make a choice. Um, that was it. And then when I moved here to Seattle after that, I only lasted there about a year because I couldn't afford it. Like, I was going broke. I was like, I don't have any money. I'm not going to be a burden on the congregation. I'm like, and I have an employable skill. I just need to be in a big city. And so then I moved here to Seattle, and that's kind of where shit hit the fan, where I was like, I'm done. um, I moved here with a friend that I know from down there. Like, we moved here together. He got a job, like opening up like a Pilates studio up here. And then I was going to move back to Texas, and he emailed me. He's like, hey, there's a job that you do. And I got a job up here. We moved to this hall where they drink a lot. Like, I know witnesses drink a lot. Like in Texas, they would drink a lot. Like football Sundays, they drink. Here, like the first time I ever blacked out drunk was with witnesses here. Like, and I don't like. I'm not the typical, I just get shit faced. Like, no, it was here. Um, I was also I realized that I was never super into like, oh, I want to get married. Like, I knew I wanted to be with someone, but I was never like again, I dated that girl. I dated like girls here and there, but it was never like, oh, like my brother was always like, oh, I love this girl. Remember, I was never like that. So I always thought like, oh, I'm gonna have the gift of singleness. Like at some point, I'm like, okay, I'll be single. That is not the case. I like realized I was gay, and so there was a really weird situation in our hall where like there was like this family where like the husband's gay and like the wife knows, and they had like his best friend living with him at the time, and it was like you could like if you don't see them at the king, like if you see them out on the street, you're like, oh, those two guys are gay, like just the way that not to be stereotypical or
Sure.
mean or anything. That's just the way. I was like, and so anyway, so then I like became friends with them because at that point I was like, I still try to give people the benefit of the doubt, and in my mind, I'm like, well, why would these people be witnesses? Like, if if they didn't want to be, because in my mind I was like, I'm free to leave whenever I want. Like, I don't have to be here, like, you know. And so I became friends with them, whatever, and like I ended up getting involved with like one of them, like the like best friend that lived with them. He was like my first like gay experience, like my first like boyfriend or something. Um, and like after that happened, I remember I felt bad that I didn't feel bad enough. Because like usually like in the drama they'll be like, oh, and once you do something wrong, you're gonna feel so bad, and you're gonna be like, oh, And I was like, I don't really feel that way. Like I'm like, man, I must be a really shitty person because I don't feel like I did this horrible thing. Like I was like, something's wrong with me because I don't feel like I committed this unforgivable sin. Um, and at that point, that was like the first time like I ever fell in love with someone, and I was like, oh, I can see why people write love songs. Like I just I wasn't having this feeling for you know someone of the opposite sex. I'm like, because I like the same sex. Um, and so I still tried because they were doing like kind of like still living like kind of going to meetings, but not really. It's this really weird dynamic that exists. I'm sure it exists in other big cities, but here for whatever reason, it's very prominent. Um, and yeah, I just got to a point where like, I don't like to live like a double life. Like that's not for me. And so I just um I went to the elders, and it wasn't like, oh, I'm sorry and whatever. It was more of like, I wanted to be honest with like myself, and if I left, I wanted people to know why I left, just to be like, whatever. And so I told the elders I did not get to fellowship for whatever reason, like, you know, you know, I don't know why. Like, I was not like, oh, I'm so sorry, I prayed you. And I was like, no, this and this happened, and I think this is where I'm at. But I think because I was so sincere, and they knew me because I had been like an elder at that hall before. I
There
wasn't an
you
elder
go.
anymore at that time,
There you
but I
go.
think they knew me, and
Yeah,
so
it's
they
who
were
you
like,
know. It's who you know and your status and things like that that sometimes can help in those situations.
and so I think that helped. And then yeah, and then it was just kind of like learning about like the doctrine. And I guess because even at that point, I was like, I wasn't sure that I wanted to leave, but I knew I was like on the fence, right? And so I was like, and I think that's also why I went to Tillers. I'm like, okay, if I'm going to stay in this, like, I want to be honest. I don't like lying about what I do. Um, but then like stepping back and like seeing like my mother passed away around that time too. Um, and I wasn't like an elder anymore. I wasn't like in good standing with the witnesses or everything. Um, when my mother passed away, I've always had like worldly friends. Like even when I was a kid, I had like worldly friends. When I was in Dallas, I had like worldly again when everybody quit talking to me because I dumped that girl in the middle of the meeting. Like I made like worldly friends at work and whatever. So I've always had like worldly friends. When my mother passed away, these are people that I had known for years and whatever. I think I got like two phone calls or two like text messages. And like the elders eventually like reached out and were like, hey, we heard your mom. Like, are you okay? Like that was it. And like people that I knew that weren't witnesses, like reached out to me, like my best friend at the time, like I stayed at his house for like a couple nights because I couldn't be, it was very traumatic, like, love my mom. And I think for me, that was the biggest difference. It was like, okay, here are a group of bad people that, you know, don't really super know me because they do know me, but like I don't get too close to them because I'm not supposed to, right? And yet they've been kind and they've been like, shown me kindness where the group that like is supposed to be my family, quote unquote, you know, because I'm no longer useful or good or whatever, they're just like kind of like discarding me. And I guess for me, that was like the straw that broke the camel's back. And I was like, I don't want to be a part of this. Like, if that's, what it is. And then as I quit going, and then I remember I had a shepherding call, like the elders came and they're like, you haven't been to meetings in like 4 months. I'm like, oh yeah, my mother died. And they're like, oh yeah, well, we heard about that. I'm like, yeah, well, that's kind of, kind of a big deal. And then they were like, well, you should come back to the meetings, blah, blah, blah. And I told them, I'm like, I don't want to go at this point in my life. Like, I know where the Kingdom Hall is at. If I ever want to go back, don't call me. I'll call you. Like, thanks, but no thanks. Bye. And yeah, that was it. And then even now, like I said, I'm not like disfellowship, right? So like they'll see me around and it's very uncomfortable on their part. Like I don't care. Like, I'll go and say hi and they get very iffy. But you can just see the stark difference because I don't go and I'm like trying to like, live my life regular. I'm like a very bad person. I'm like a bad association, whatever. Where these other kind of witnesses, like the guy I was involved with and like the gay couple, even though they're doing really bad stuff too, because they go to like the memorial once a year or, you'll see like them at the meeting or something. Well, they're still somehow good human beings and like they're okay. And I'm like, I ran into these people on Pride on Sunday. Like we were all like, half naked getting drunk. But then they go and like, will answer at a watchtower. I'm like, this is Jehovah can't possibly be this stupid. Like, there's no way. And so yeah, I think for me that was it. And then just learning about like, you know, like the manipulation that it is. Cause you don't think of it as manipulation at the time, right? But now um you do. And like I remember talking to my sister, right, as I was like, all that was happening, and like I knew I was gay and blah blah. And the thing at the, remember when they shot that club in Orlando?
Oh yeah.
The, yeah, when they shot that club and, those like, people died. And because I call my sister every, we talk almost like 2 or 3 times a week, right? We're really close. This is the one that's 8 years older than me. But
Mhm.
we're really close. And at the time we were talking, and she had just gotten home from the meeting. Again, she's in Texas, they don't like know about me at that time, whatever. And we were just talking about like, oh yeah, what happened? Because it was in the news, right? And then my sister made a comment that they made a comment on the stage from her meeting in Texas. And they were very much like, it's sad that it happened, but because they live that lifestyle, well, what did you expect? Like, they made it like, well, if they had been at the Kingdom Hall, like this wouldn't have happened. Like, it was basically like they brought it on themselves.
They
Um,
deserved it.
they deserved it. And I told my sister, I was like, oh, that's interesting. She's like, well, yeah, whatever. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, so what if this guy went into a mall and killed like just couples that were eating together? Non-witnesses, they'll live together before they're married and they'll have sex and whatever. I'm like, would they deserve it? I'm like, because it's the same thing, right? Like whether you're gay or you're fornicating, it's going to be the same punishment in the end.
Hmm.
I'm like, would you say they deserve it? And she was like, she got very defensive. She's like, well, no, but and I think at that point she kind of knew some. She's like, why are you sticking up for them? I'm like, there's a lot you don't know, about this. And I don't think my mom had died at that point. She already knew that I wasn't going to meetings and stuff like that. And I have my oldest brother. He got disfellowshipped like, I don't know, like early 2000s, like 2002, 2003. He left his wife, and again, it was a very, they should have never been married, but and so we actually quit talking to him because he was disfellowship. And they teach you because it's the right thing to do, and blah blah blah.
It's loving.
It's loving. And even now, looking back at that point, I'm like, I still don't agree with some of his choices. Like, I probably would still have been angry of what he did, but it was not right to like not talk to him because of that.
No,
And
that
so,
not your life.
yeah. And so at that point, I reached out to him, right? And we became like friends on Facebook or, something stupid. And I would talk to my brother like twice a year, just like check up on him. And my sister was like, well, you're like defending these people at the club, and she's like, and you're like, talking, to my brother. She's like, you're talking to him. And I don't know, she was like, your life's not doing too good and whatever. And I told her, I was like, I'm like, our mom is really, really sick. I'm like, one of these days she's going to die. Like, I know healthcare. Like, I know when people, are on their last, she had very health problem. And I was like, one day she's going to die. I'm like, it's going to be very awkward that my first conversation with my brother in like 20 years to be, hey, our mom's dead. Like, what are we going to do about it? I'm like, so I'm just trying to build like a foundation so that it's not like that when that day comes. And sure enough, a couple years later, my mom passed away. And I had already talked to my brother. So I was the one that had to call all my siblings and tell them, because my dad called me and then I had to call everyone and, break the news. Um, and so my sister was like kind of like shunning me at that point. She was not like talking to me. She went like maybe a year or like 2 years maybe without like, because I told her I don't want to go to meetings and um, and she quit talking to me. And then when my mom died, we all kind of had to get together for the funeral and everything. And then she kind of came to her senses and she was like, she's like, you were right. She's like, it was very awkward to like see our brother for the first time in 20 years and like have it be our mom's funeral. And I told her, I'm like, we're all each other has, like we're blood, we're family, you know. I'm like, the witnesses, like they'll toss you to the curb the moment, you're not needed or whatever. I'm like, so she kind of sees that. And I think also the pandemic has helped a lot too, because they don't go to the meetings anymore. And so now my sister will tell me stuff that like I don't think she would have ever said years before. Like they got on her case about like not having her camera on because she works some days like during the meeting. And basically she told the others like, I'm either going to do this on my phone while I'm working or I'm not doing it at all. Like you choose. And they were like, okay, well just, be mindful, sister. And she was like, she basically told them, F off, which was nice. And we talked about my niece, because I have a niece now, she's 12. And so we were talking about people being like disfellowshipped. And like you said, like, oh, I was 9. And, my brother, when he got baptized, he was like 12 or something. Like we all got baptized really, really young. And I have my niece, and I was like, I was like, okay, I told my sister, I'm like, okay, I'm like, you have a daughter. I'm like, would you let her get married at like 10 or 11 years old? And she's like, no, absolutely not. I'm like, okay, I'm like, if marriage is the second most important commitment a witness can make, because baptism is more important, I'm like, why on earth would you let someone get baptized at that? I'm like, if you're not old enough to get married, right, which is second, why would you be able to make the first important decision? And she didn't know what to say. And then later on, she's like, no, I guess you're right. She's like, I never really thought of it that way. And like, even now, she's like, I don't pressure my dad. She's like, if she wants to do it, great. And like, even now, she's like, I want my niece to go to college. She's like, we're saving up for a college fund. And, she's doing, you can tell that there's like a shift in like, they're witnesses, but they're not like super like hardcore about it. So
That's good. Hopefully that allows their kids the leeway to explore who they were, because I know that the witnesses say that baptism is a protection, and it would be easy to say that, but I mean, one of the things that it protects you from is the ability to be yourself. And that's a bad thing. And so being able to do self-exploration, being able to explore the world to figure out who you are, what your identity is a lot more important than being given an identity at 9 years old. And I'm happy that it sounds like you have been able to explore your identity as you've gotten older, to figure out who you are, everything from your sexuality to the things you care about. That's a really important part of life. And it's a shame that so many of us were kept from that for so many years because of a moment when we were 9 or 14 or whatever. That symbolism of dedication and baptism prevented us really from being able to explore who we were, because we had made a commitment and we were trying to be what everybody else wanted us to be. And now you actually get to be yourself. You're figuring that out, figuring out how you believe or what you see about all of this stuff. So good for you. That's a really important thing, to be able to be yourself, which is something that it sounds like you've always kind of wanted to be.
Yeah, I mean, I can thank my mom for that. She had a very strong, like, she was very sure of who she was. She was a very devout Jehovah's Witness, and she believed it. Like, she was disfellowshipped like 4 times or something. Like, she would get in trouble a lot and then always come back, and that's what she did. But she was very sincere. When we had her funeral, she was like not only like mean to us, right? Like, she was mean to everyone. She like called it as it was. Like, she did not mince words with anybody. When she passed away, I think that's the last time I've ever been to Kingdom Hall. Like, when she died for her service, right? When she died, I thought there was gonna be like us and maybe like 5 or 10 people, or whatever. There was like 400 people there. At her funeral. And again, she was not a pioneer. She was not like Susie, like, she was not anything like that you would say like, oh, a special thing as like a witness. But I think she was so authentic, like, people really appreciated that. And like, I met people at her funeral that were like, oh, like, your mom helped me back in like the 60s or like, in the 70s. And it wasn't like, oh, she studied with me. They were like, I was homeless and like, your mom gave me a place to stay. And like, or they were like, growing up, there would be a lot of like girls, again, they would get pregnant or they have sex before marriage and they get disfellowship, whatever. And I always remember my mom, because she had been there, she was really kind. Like, even though she wasn't supposed to like talk to them, she could care less. Like, she would go and like help them with the baby, or like if they needed something, like help them. And I think that was really nice. And I think that was also, you can't be both, right? You can't be a human and be like a good witness, because you have to give up one. Either you're going to show like empathy and humanity to people, or you're going to be a good Jehovah's Witness. Like you can't do both well. And I think my mom always chose to be a good human as best as she could, you know. And so I always really appreciated that about that. And I I think that helped me in my life. Like if the choice was like being shitty because Jehovah says, or be nice because it's the right thing to do, then just be nice. And if Jehovah doesn't like it, it's his problem. Like if he doesn't like it, then it's his problem. But I'm not like bitter or something about being a witness. I'm not like, oh my god, it ruined my life. Like in my case, I think it worked out the best. Like situation, like things ended up working out like dominoes. Like it fell out. I have a lot of really good friends to this day that are mostly they're all ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, because like I think it's also a self-selecting group. Like I gravitated towards people that were like kind of felt this was bullshit in the beginning, so like we all ended up like just piecing out. But yeah, I still have like one of my really, really good friends that I met when I was like 15. Like she's not a witness, and like we like went to Hawaii last year. Like 4 of us went to Hawaii last year and took like a little vacation. It was mostly like ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. And like when I was in my MTS assignment, that Portuguese hall, there was a guy, so the presiding overseer and his wife, like, or the coordinator and his wife, they have 2 sons, and they're like older. They're about my age or a little bit older. One of them, I didn't even know at the time. He was in Portugal, like doing his master's. We're all friends, like, because they all are not witnesses. And like, there's other people that I've met that like have left the religion, and I'm really thankful that I have a really good group of like ex-Jehovah's Witness like friends, because it's not super awkward. So like like I said, I don't know if you like watch Seinfeld a lot, but we don't do, because Christmas is really weird, right? Like like I've done Christmas at work and like with like friends here, and it's just like, okay, stand by the tree, give presents. Like it's not really, I don't have like memories to draw off of like, oh, when I was little and I got, it was like I got in trouble for Christmas once. That's all I remember. So we'll do Festivus. So we'll do like George Costanza's dad, he makes up the holiday. So we'll like do like Festivus like celebrations with each other, just because it's like, I think like every like ex-Jehovah's Witness can do like Festivus, because it's so ridiculous. Like just the holiday is so dumb. Like we'll do that. So
that's awesome. So you found your own way in it. Look, just like your mom was neither all good nor all bad, the same goes with Jehovah's Witnesses. It's not all good, nor is it all bad. There are some things, we had some legitimate good moments in that. At times we met some really legitimately good people along the way. They maybe do some kind of awful things because the cult makes them do that. But that doesn't mean that they're awful to their core, and that defines them necessarily. People, we're all complex. There's a yin and a yang to life, a good and a bad, and most things have some combination thereof in them. And I think it's really cool that, look, you weren't dealt the best hand in some ways, but you found ways to make the most of what you were dealt, and you've tried to call a good life out of that, and you've got some good people around you, it sounds like, and you found yourself, and those are really wonderful things to be able to have in life, however it is you come about it. It's not, I think we get lost sometimes in the comparison, like with abuse or whatever. There are some people who are bitter because they were raped their whole life in the cult and nobody cared, and they have every right to be as bitter as they want, right? And there are other people who maybe had some different situations or grew up in a different sometimes culture or environment or the place. We all have different situations, and we all get to feel how we feel when we come out. And it's I'm glad that you seem to be able to have to hold on to some positives out of it. We don't have to throw it all away necessarily. That's good. I'm glad that you had some good things that came out of it. And I'm glad that it sounds like, even at that, some of these people are still around you and you get to have some fun with them. And that's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thankful for that, and like I said, I the people that kind of reach out to me still, like they know, like they know my lifestyle. I have a beard. They go on my Instagram and it's like all shirtless men or something. It's not like, oh my god, this like not a mystery what's going on. But I think because they need an outlet, and I think there is a lot more people that have a lot more doubts than
Oh
they're
yeah.
willing to say, and so I,
All witnesses
I,
have doubts.
and no one should stay in if they don't want to. No one should stay for. And I think that is where I draw the line, because I was never really like, I'm going to be an activist. And like, and I still I got better things to do. I'm not going to be like, oh, with a placard or anything. But I do think that if you're not making an informed decision, right, then you're not really making a decision. And we say,
Right.
we say that in healthcare, it's informed consent, like, right, like, you know with the vaccine or with whatever, like you have to know the benefits and the potential drawbacks.
Hmm.
And at the end of the day, you make the choice. You know, if you're making the choice based off of lies or off of fear, whatever, then it's not really a choice, right? But at the end of the day, you have to make a choice. But, the witnesses, it's never really a choice.
No, it's
They give you
coercion.
they give you the illusion of like choosing, right? And then I guess when you would say, if there was something that really kind of stuck with me or made me kind of really tip the scales, I would say I knew about like the child abuse thing. I never agreed with it. Um, I had instances when I was an elder where it came up, you know. I can think of like one time where like it was something fishy where they were like, like it was kind of one of those like gray areas where, you don't know and whatever. And I remember my advice was like, go to the police. Like, I can't do anything about it. I'm not trained for this. I'm like, none of us are. I'm like, you need to go to the authorities and they'll figure it out. And they were like, well, I don't want to. And I was like, look, these people are trained. They know what they're doing. They know the law. If you need help, they are the ones to do it. I'm like, not us. Because that was another thing that really bugged me as being a witness was like, as an elder, I knew what I didn't know because I had gone to school, because of my experiences and whatever. So I knew my position as an elder, or the position that they tell you, is to be like a guide. Like if someone comes and asks me like, oh, what do you think about this? I'm like, well, the Bible says this, and you take them and that's it. Like that's where it should end. Like this is what the Bible says. That's it. Um, I remember I was in a meeting once where there was a brother and he was talking about like mental health. And he was like, oh, well, he gave an experience about a sister being sick and she went to the doctor and nothing the doctor said worked. And she went to the circuit overseer and the circuit overseer said, pray. And she prayed and she felt better. So see, she went through all those doctors and the circuit overseer. And I went up to him in the meeting. I'm like, that's very dangerous what you're telling people. And he was like, well, why? And I'm like, I work in this field. I'm like, people do need medicine. Like some people, and I knew about like from my mom, like that's the advice she had been given, like, you know, and like the misogyny of the religion too. Like, I don't want to, because I'm not bitter, I don't want to say like, oh, everything's great. Like there are very things that I do not like. Um, the misogyny of like, when you hear in like the conventions, right, or the assemblies, and they're like, you know, a man can be like a drug addict or whatever, come in and like, oh, wow, he changed his life or whatever. A woman is like, oh, he beat me for 40 years. And then one day his fist got tired and he opened up a watchtower. Now he's here. And then they're like, aren't we glad she stuck it out? Like, no, like that's horrible advice. Like, you don't tell people to do that. It's like, how many, and I think honestly, I think that's probably why my mom stuck out her marriage, because she had kids. We didn't need my dad financially, because honestly, if you look at it, she was the one supporting us. Like the only reason she kept him around was because of the witnesses, you know, where if she had had the leeway to like, hey, get out of this bad relationship, she probably would have done so and lived a lot happier. She might still be alive today. Like, you don't know, like, she, but you have a lot of uninformed people
Mhm.
giving you advice that they are not qualified to give, but they've been made to believe that they're qualified to give it. And at least when I became an elder, I knew what my boundaries were because I knew what I was. I knew not to give health advice. You know, so I don't know. Like,
Sounds
there's a
like
lot of bad stuff.
sounds like you were self-aware, and I think that's just a good point to make. Uh, not all elders are narcissistic assholes. There certainly are a lot of them, and some, are drawn to the power of the position. But there are also a lot of people who just want to help, and they think they're doing the right thing, and they're sincere, and they don't want to. They're not trying to hurt anybody, but they're captive to the concept too. There's sometimes even maybe more so, because it is the greatest yes man that often ends up as the elder. Those who ask too many questions often don't.
How I became an elder is beyond me. Like, I have no, I think, and I have a theory. I think it's because you go to this school, right? And
Yeah.
then I think they send a letter, and they're like, "Oh, this person should be an elder, whatever." But I think even like the elders in my hall, they're like, "We don't know." Like, we like anyone that knew me, like really knew me, like this guy is not like, like even now that I'm gone, a lot of people that really know me, they're like, "Yeah, we can see it." Like, they're like, Jared tried, but he was not cut out for this life. Like, I tried, but I was not.
Right, but at the end of the day, you did actually care about people, and I
Yeah,
think you did want to help.
yeah,
Just like you're in the helping profession today. I think you did care about people and want to help. You just That's just not the right way to do it. Ultimately, to be, like you said, a good elder, you're not going to be able to, carry your compassion forward at all times and be able to be super sincere. So that's why it was a bad fit for you. So good for you. Um, so what do you enjoy about your life today? I mean, as you're exploring yourself, life, who you are, and all these things, what do you enjoy about life today? And is there anything that I don't know, anything that you want to explore in the future that you're hoping to do?
um, I guess one of the hardest things for me leaving the religion was that sense of certainty. When you don't have to think about the future because it's already planned out, it's very easy. Like, that gave me a lot of anxiety. Like, oh, what do I do now, right? Over time, I've turned that anxiety into like a little bit of excitement. Like, oh, like I can try this, I can try that. Um, just because like I'm not a witness, like my life didn't magically get better, because I'm not a witness. Like, I still have problems, and dating sucks, and it is what it is. But um, I enjoy, you know, even though I never really had to like hide who I've been, I enjoy not having to do it at all. And I'm not saying from the witnesses, but even vice versa. When you would be with like worldly people, whatever, there was always parts of your life that you couldn't share, and you don't say things because you don't want to make the organization look bad, right? That was the rationale. Like, oh, you don't say this because you don't want to besmirch Jehovah's name. And like now I just say it all. And it's so funny because I'll be out with all my friends and they'll be like, did you know like he was like a minister? And they'll make fun of me and they'll be like, oh, like go to, like they'll like brag on me. And it sounds crazy. And they'll be like, oh my God, you have, I'm like, yeah, I believe that. It was batshit crazy. I'm like, this was like no joke. Like, this is what we believed. Um, Having that in the background, I think it gives me a lot of empathy towards people, or it helps me be a little bit more empathetic because I know, like, I can see, when I see someone really fanatical about something, whatever it may be, I can see that if they're coming from a sincere place, like, I get it. I'm like, you know what? I was there. Like, you're not a bad, person. Um, I live in, Seattle, Washington. It's a very progressive, very blue city Democrat, whatever, and values that I like and I identify with, and but sometimes people will be like, oh, can you believe these people, like other people, other places, like, oh, they're doing that and they're so weird and whatever. And I'm like, they're doing that because they really believe that maybe that's their best way of life. Um, I don't agree with people like hating, gay people or whatever, but I do understand the apprehension to it, and I'm a big believer in you get more bees with honey than you do with vinegar. If you're kind and if you're sweet, you bake a better case for yourself.
Yeah,
So
you
I think,
can't have intolerance does not breed conversation on either side.
and that's what I feel. And so I guess what I look forward to, or what I enjoy about my life is like having that perspective, being able to see two different things. I'm really thankful for the family that I have. So one of the biggest lies I think that's really interesting in the witnesses is that, which is any cult, right? They're like, oh, we're your family. Like, this is like, we are your family, and we'll take you, and we love each other, which is true. Like, the people did care, and they're nice and whatever. Um, I'm thankful that I have a really good relationship with my family now. It's not perfect. We're still siblings, and we bicker, and my dad, I'm not super close to him because he's kind of a jerk, but I call him now, he's older and whatever. Um, but I am thankful that now that I'm out, I can have like a very honest relationship with my family, with my siblings, versus before Jehovah has to be number one or the organization has to be number one. And then you revolve around that. We're like, you know, it's not like that anymore. Like now we can just, I can talk to my siblings, about whatever's going on in my life. And if they're afraid of something, they can tell me. And, you don't have this like, you don't have to frame everything about the religion, like they can be sad because they're sad. They can be anxious because they're anxious. Like they can be happy because they're happy. Like it doesn't have to be like, oh my God, I got a Bible study. Boy, I'm so happy. Like my sister's like, oh my God, I got a raise. Like that's amazing. Like you can have genuine emotions that you can't have as a witness. So I'm excited for that. And it's like what I want to do in the future. I mean, I want to change careers. I don't know what yet. I think I'm gonna go back to school to like maybe be like a mid-level provider, like something like that, or I don't know, maybe become a teacher. I really don't know. Like I just know I'm at that point where I've been doing something long enough where I need to change something else.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, if I can help anyone, I'm never going to convince anyone to leave if they don't want to leave, right? Like that's
Mm-mm.
just,
You can't wake somebody up who's totally asleep.
yeah, you can't, I'm not going to, but I do think, like I say, I have certain friends that are like, they'll talk to me because they know, like you can tell they want to ask something, but they're just like, don't, and I think I'm getting better at communicating like, oh, well, whatever. And I'll make like little remarks or something and they'll agree with it. So I think in that way, if I can help people kind of, or at least my friends or people that I'm close to, I had a really cool experience last year or the year before. I think it was last year or 2020. So one of the guys that I went to the hall with, the Portuguese hall in Dallas, um, I fell out of touch with these people once I left. And he was the guy that had gotten married first and, was like, I was the one runner up to get married. And then I like started following him on Instagram and whatever. And the first telltale sign of a man not being a witness is like they grow facial hair because that's the one thing they don't let you do. So you do it, right? And I happen to like my beard. I love growing a beard. Like I actually would grow a beard while I was still going to the meetings. Like when I was my last, like year or something as a witness, I had a beard, like I had a full beard. And the elders would be like, the beard is like, like, it looks wrong and whatever. And then I would have like little older, like Mexican, in a Spanish hall, but little older, like Mexican sisters. They'd be like, you look so good with the beard. Like, don't ever shave it. Like, you look like they loved it. Like the old ladies loved it. Like, with, but anyway, so this guy like has a beard, right? And so we kind of start talking, whatever. And I'm like, I forget who asked. I'm like, you don't go anywhere, do you? He's like, no. He's like, you don't go. I'm like, no. And then it turns out he left when he had a kid. So he was like an elder, same thing, like super, he was like a really good, we were like oil and water. Like we did not get along because he was like a goody goody and I was like, kind of rebel. And so we never really meshed. But when he had a kid, he started thinking about like, well, do I want to raise my child in this? Like it really made him think. And he was like, I don't want to do this. And so anyway, long story short, he came here, got remarried, like to another, girl. And I got to be like in his wedding, like his best man, because like,
Oh, cool.
and it was nice to know someone that I had a history of like 15, 16 years ago, you know, she, be, and I was like, oh, like I've been to both of your like weddings. That's pretty cool. And he's like, shut up. He's just like, but I think I'm very thankful for that as well. That I've got to keep in touch with people, that have chosen to leave, so
Yeah,
if I can keep doing that.
Yeah, you certainly have a unique path in that you haven't been hard shunned. And it has allowed you to keep certain relationships that you would like to keep, or maybe have some people reach out to you that wouldn't reach out otherwise if you were hard shunned, which is, it's unique that you weren't.
And sometimes with that guy that I was telling you about, like, because we were talking about it, like, and everyone's different, right? Like some people, I get it. Like if you had a very traumatic experience, like you just want a clean break, and like I don't want to, and I get that. There's people that like dissociate themselves or get disfellowship, and it has to be like a very clear break.
Mm-hmm.
Me, not so much, because I said what I needed to say and that's it. People are like, oh, like I have friends that are like, oh, do you ever want to like disassociate yourself, whatever. In my personal, like my point of view, I don't have people coming and wanting me to go to meetings, right? Like Seattle's so big, like I always run
Let's
into
face it, you did the things to get disfellowshipped and they just didn't disfellowship.
Exactly. So like if they wanted me out, they could have kicked me out.
Yeah.
But my thing is, and I have another friend who was disfellowship, my good friend from when I was 17. She had a really weird thing, and she had to go through a lot of therapy and whatever. And basically her thing was like, she told me what her therapist told her was like, when she would go out, she's like, if I meet another witness, I have to tell them like I'm disfellowshipped, and then they get weird and whatever. And her therapist was like, why? Like, why do you have to tell these people anything?
No, you don't have to tell them that.
And then she was like, oh yeah, like, and that's the way I feel. I'm like, if you're going to come out and ask me, then we're going to have this conversation. But if you're going to tiptoe around the subject and like not come out and ask me, I'm fine playing stupid. I can play the stupid game too. Like,
well, you don't have to wear a scarlet D for disfellowshipped or disassociated. You can disassociate and still just talk to people like people or whatever if you want. I mean, most Jehovah's Witnesses are fairly unhealthy and not people you typically want a lot in your life, but occasionally, you have some that are all right and that you can keep up with, or be able to have some sort of relationship on some level with, depending on how they are. And it sounds like if you're able to have good boundaries and not talk about it at all, that might be a good thing.
Well, and but it's funny how they ask, right? So I have a friend that like, they'll reach out to me and they'll be like, they'll always ask like, well, what time's your meeting? To kind of like, to get you to say like, oh, I don't go to meetings, whatever.
Sure.
And I'm like, oh, I think they have the meeting at 10. Like, I'll be very like, throw it back on them. And they'd be like, someone was asking me like, oh, don't they have a problem in your hall that you have a beard? I'm like, not that I know of. Like, I haven't been there in years, right? And I'm like, not that I know of. Like, oh, and I'm just like, if you're not brave enough to come and ask me, like, if you don't want to be like, hey, Jared, are you still a good person by going to the Kingdom Hall? Then we can have that conversation. But if I only hear from you every once in a while because you want to like coax this information out of me, I can do the dance too. Like, it takes 5 seconds for me.
There are games that can be played if you want to play them.
If you want to, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Like, we want to do this. Like, let's do it.
Yeah.
It's
well, I'm glad that you've been able to, again, create a good life for yourself out of this. I mean, I know it's not a perfect life. We don't have to qualify that because nobody's life is perfect. But, you're exploring life. You're free to do so. You're just being yourself. And at the end of the day, isn't that what life is about? Figuring out who you are, growing as a person, and, hopefully helping others along the way and being a generally good egg, a helpful, kind person. That sounds like that's what you've been able to make out of it. And you've certainly made the most of some of the examples that you were shown in your life. So good for you. I really appreciate you sharing your story, and I'm sure that there will be others out there that find something that they identify with too.
No, thank you. Thanks for, I like what you do. Like I said, I enjoy listening to, there are like certain stories that I've, listened to like on yours and other, where they're like, oh, like, you know, we're not alone. Like, people,
No,
it is very isolating, to feel. And again, I know I'm maybe an anomaly, right? Because I have a lot of ex-JW friends and, whatever. I think I'm the exception to the
sure.
rule, to be honest. Um, so it's nice for other people to like have this outlet, And again, I live in a very metropolitan city and I can go out and whatever. I think if you're like in a small town, like like it would be very hard if I lived in a town of like 20,000 people, and
Sure.
everyone I knew was a witness. Like it would suck, So,
Or if they took the
I'm
hard
out of it.
lines they're supposed to take. So it also depends on the particular ones you're around, right?
Yeah.
But you've been able to, you are the exception, but the exception needs to be told too. And there are maybe other exceptions out there that will hear this and be like, hey, that's me. I've got some of this too. And that's kind of a cool thing, that you can help somebody else to realize that they're not alone in maybe the path that they're on. We're not all the same and we're not all going to have the same lives. And that's okay. It's cool.
Yeah,
That's what
no,
makes life interesting. It's better than a cult, right?
that is, let me
Where
tell
everybody
you,
has to be the same.
there is no better feeling, at least when I quit going, than like waking up on a Saturday morning and not having to go on field service. I was like, wait, what? Like, you can do this? I'm like, this is an option? Like,
Well, I'm glad that you're able to experience that now. And yeah, we'll end it there on a good note. The feeling that you get on a Saturday morning, waking up knowing that you don't have to go do somebody else's bidding.
that is
Beautiful thing.
priceless.